Chapter 220. Qi Shui walked over the corpses that were strewn all over the place. There was a thick smell of blood everywhere. There were corpses everywhere. Some of them were poisoned to death while others were hacked to death. There was almost no complete body and blood was everywhere. In the past, when he watched blood movies, he always felt that there was too much ketchup. Now he suddenly felt that it wasn't good to be too realistic. Looking at those halved corpses, broken limbs everywhere, and the ground full of internal organs and flesh, if it was in the past, he would have vomited yesterday night's dinner. Ren Baqin also saw an interesting thing in the pile of corpses. It was a box with many small holes on it. It wasn't just one or two. That was the central position of the Great Xia army. All the soldiers were poisoned to death. There were many such boxes on the ground, but most of them were trampled on, revealing the crossbow bolts inside. Only a few were still intact. He jumped down and picked one up. Teng Ji saw it from a distance and said, "It's a Great Xia crossbow. There should be a crossbow battalion here." Ren Baqin aimed the box at an empty space not far away and found something that looked like a wrench. He pressed it and felt a jolt in his hand. In a split second, 12 crossbow bolts were shot out and nailed into the ground. This thing is pretty powerful. Ren Baqin was a little speechless. Even though it wasn't as good as modern firearms, which required half a day to load a crossbow bolt and had a shorter range, it was still pretty powerful. Previously, this crossbow battalion should have been protecting the central position of the Great Xia army. The opponent's plan was to use the bowmen in the first few rows to reduce the number of winged cavalry warriors. After that, the bowmen would withdraw from the sides and reveal the crossbow battalion. This was the perfect time to deal a painful blow to the winged cavalry. It was a pity that neither the bowmen nor the crossbow battalion were put to use, especially the crossbow battalion. They didn't even have the chance to display their strength and were immediately poisoned to death. This could only be considered as Great Xia's bad luck. Ren Baqin originally wanted to pick up a few crossbows, but after thinking that they were covered in sarin gas, he gave up. After walking for a long distance, there were only scattered corpses in the surroundings. Only then did the smell of blood in the surroundings disperse. Sigh, such is life. Ren Baqin looked at the sky at a 45-degree angle and sighed. He was really a little uncomfortable. Even though there were quite a number of corpses in the past, firstly, there weren't as many as this time. Secondly, he didn't walk on a pile of corpses. The feeling of walking on a pile of corpses from Af was definitely different. Especially of such a miserable scene. Fortunately, he only sighed and pretended to be sentimental. Then he threw this matter to the back of his mind. Such things happened everywhere and he couldn't care less about it. Unless the world was unified and could maintain a few hundred years of peace, it would be the same on every battlefield. After advancing another few hundred meters, the winged cavalry at the front suddenly rushed forward. "Your Majesty." Teng Ji remained at his original position and cupped his hands at the Empress. "What is it?" the Empress asked. "There are many corpses up ahead. Judging from the direction and the way they're dressed, they're probably from the Protectorate of the North." The Empress's face immediately turned gloomy. When the winged cavalry in front of them gradually stopped and split into two sides, Ren Baqin and the Empress finally saw the scene in front of them. Corpses, weapons and arrows were strewn all over the place. In the middle stood a headless man, but he held a saber with both hands and stood firmly on the ground. There were wounds all over his body, and his flesh was split open on both sides. Just by looking at this scene, one could feel a solemn and tragic aura. The Empress got down from Qi Shui and slowly walked over. Ren Baqin quickly jumped down and followed behind her. The battlefield just now made him feel that it was a massacre, but this place made him feel sad. There weren't only corpses of aboriginal soldiers, but also corpses of Great Xia soldiers. All the aboriginal soldiers were like sieves with short arrows pierced through their bodies. They weren't shot by bows but by crossbows. They were the kind of repeating crossbows that were picked up from the battlefield just now. It could be imagined that these soldiers rushed over from the Protectorate of the North to welcome the Empress. Together with the winged cavalry, they launched a pincer attack on the Great Xia army, but they were ambushed by Great Xia. Both sides engaged in a chaotic battle here, and eventually the aboriginal army was completely annihilated. Furthermore, this happened 2 days ago. Because Ren Baqin's journey back to Earth was delayed by 2 days, the Great Xia army calmly intercepted the Empress and her party after they reorganized themselves. The result was too tragic to look at. According to Ren Baqin's imagination, this was a place where Great Xia would first attack with crossbows from both sides. Then, the soldiers would charge forward and use crossbows to kill the surviving aboriginal soldiers and Great Xia soldiers. Even so, the number of aboriginal soldiers at the scene was much fewer than the Great Xia soldiers. At first glance, the ratio was about 1 to 2 to 2.5. Approximately 1,000 Aboriginal soldiers and 2,000 Great Xia soldiers were buried here. As for the burly man who was standing, in addition to the wounds from the swords and arrows, there were also purplish-black marks on his body as if he was tied up by something. Rinpoche immediately recalled the chain that appeared out of thin air and bound the Empress with his binoculars. Looking at all this, the Empress's ice-cold aura became even more intense. It made people around her feel as if the surrounding temperature had dropped, and they trembled all over. This was emitted from her murderous aura. "Your Majesty, it's Lin Yaoqi." Li Tanhua still had a poker face. He held a bloody head that was glaring angrily and came forward. Lin Yaoqi was considered a valiant general in the Protectorate of the North, but he didn't expect to die here. The only consolation was that the Zhumu elders only lived 2 days longer than him. "Your Majesty, there are corpses in the forest as well." At this moment, the winged cavalry warriors who ran into the forest to check on the two sides ran out to report. Rinpoche followed the Empress into the forest, and indeed, there were some corpses lying on the ground. However, there weren't many of them. There were only a few scattered corpses of Great Xia and Aboriginal soldiers. However, the Aboriginal soldiers who were able to rush into this place were slightly stronger. The Protectorate of the North wasn't the winged cavalry. Ordinary soldiers had just attained the strength of a man-wheel expert, and an earth-wheel expert could already serve as a low-level commander. Those who could withstand crossbows and enter the forest were at least at the advanced level of the man-wheel level. "Bring all of them back." The Empress paused for a moment, turned around and returned to the back of Chishui. Rinpoche stood there and watched as everyone took off the heads and hung them on both sides of their mounts. He sighed and returned to the back of Chishui. He didn't know if the families of these 1,000 people would hate him. Even though the Aboriginals didn't view death as a big deal, this battlefield still affected the mood of the troops. For the rest of the journey, everyone was much less talkative. When the sky turned dark, everyone walked out of this mountain range and saw a plain in front of them. Everyone rested for 2 hours before setting off again. As expected, there weren't any obstructions in front of them. By late at night, they had already crossed the border of Great Xia and returned to the territory of Deyo. Not long after entering Deyo, they encountered a group of mounted scouts holding torches. After asking loudly and confirming that it was the winged cavalry, they immediately asked in delight, "May I know if Her Majesty is inside?" After receiving a confirmation, they immediately sent someone back to report and brought a group of people to see the Empress. When they got closer, they realized that this mounted scout had some injuries on his body and his arm was bandaged. Not only was he injured, but a few people behind him were also injured. "What happened? Where's General Hongwu?" the Empress inquired. "Your Majesty, a few days ago, Chesua Pass sent troops to attack Ping City and only retreated today. General Hongwu is overseeing Ping City," the soldier replied. From time to time he would glance at Rinpoche, who was riding with the Empress. Apart from the depths of the 60,000 mountains, the news of the Empress choosing a husband was almost everywhere in Deyo. When he saw Rinpoche, he could guess who he was. Originally he wanted to see if there was anything strange about him, but he was disappointed when he saw him. Chapter 221. Ping City was located in the northernmost part of Deyo and was only half a day away from Great Xia's Chesua Pass. This small city with a population of less than 50,000 was like the tip of a knife pointing at Great Xia for decades, preventing them from advancing. The walls of Ping City were 15 meters tall and covered with all kinds of burn marks and repair marks. Many bloodstains had already seeped into the walls. At this time, Ping City was more dilapidated than usual. There were many scattered gravel outside the city, which was left by Great Xia's catapults. Logically speaking, the soldiers and civilians of Ping City should be able to take a good rest after the Great Xia army retreated. However, torches were lit both on and outside the city. Hongwu led a group of generals outside the city to welcome them. After waiting for a short while, they heard the sound of hooves coming from the darkness. Everyone was delighted. A moment later, silhouettes began to appear in the darkness and became clearer. Hongwu immediately saw the heads hanging on the winged cavalry. The Aboriginals didn't have the habit of cutting off their enemies' heads as trophies of war. They always carried the heads of their comrades back to the 60,000 mountains. When he saw the glaring head hanging beside Li Tanhua's mount, Hongwu's expression remained unchanged, but he sighed in his heart. Lin Yaoqi was very talented and Hongwu thought highly of him. There was a high chance that Lin Yaoqi would reach Hongwu's level in the future. When he saw Chi Shui, Hongwu shouted, "I welcome your Majesty." At the same time he stared daggers at Rinpochen who was on Qi Shui's back. After all, this incident was because of him. Even though the Empress had returned and destroyed the 9 pavilions to become the 5th most powerful expert in the world, he hoped that such a thing would never happen. Not to mention that Rinpochen was riding the same mount as the Empress. He actually dared to do so, and Her Majesty actually allowed it. Not only him but the other generals were also astonished. Rinpochen felt that everyone was looking at him and felt a little awkward. It was fine when they were outside, but now that he was riding the same mount as the Empress under the watchful eyes of the generals, it seemed a little inappropriate. Furthermore, after this incident, these people definitely wouldn't like him. It was better for him to obediently jump down. However, just as he was about to jump down from Qi Shui's back, he felt his waist go numb and couldn't move half of his body. Then, a hand grabbed onto his clothes and firmly held him in place. "Let's talk inside the city," the Empress said to everyone. "Yes." Everyone immediately responded. Under the watchful eyes of everyone, Rinpochen and the Empress rode into the city together. However, Hongwu and a few others noticed the Empress's petty actions and secretly shook their heads. When they entered the city, everyone's attention was on the winged cavalry that accompanied them. At a glance, everyone realized that there was something wrong with the number of winged cavalry. It wasn't that there were too few of them but that there were too many of them. At present, 7 out of the 10 winged cavalry teams had returned. This meant that the Empress had at most 3 winged cavalry teams, which amounted to more than 400 people. According to what they knew, this group of people had been intercepted at least 3 times. The first time was near Mt Yuyang, and the second time was at the entrance of Mt Lianin. More than 6,000 Great Xia soldiers died in battle. They had already obtained this information from Great Xia, but when they looked over they actually didn't see any decrease in the winged cavalry. There was also the interception at the Falling Moon Gorge. Even though everyone didn't know the specifics, they could more or less make some guesses. As such, Hongwu arranged for Lin Yaoqi to lead 1,000 soldiers to fetch the Empress. But now the heads of those 1,000 people had been brought back. Everyone could see the heads hanging on both sides of the winged cavalry's mounts and also Lin Yaoqi's head. Logically speaking, the situation of the battle should have been very tragic, but the winged cavalry didn't suffer any casualties. This made everyone extremely flabbergasted. On the way back to the city, everyone did a careful count. A total of 6 people were missing, and there were exactly 6 empty mounts. Everyone had question marks in their hearts as they didn't know what exactly happened. Were the winged cavalry really that powerful? Out of the 7 other teams, only 4 didn't encounter any interception. The other 3 teams also suffered quite a lot of casualties. One of the teams only had half of its people return, and the rest were all wounded. After entering the general's residence in the middle of Ping City, Rinpochen was arranged to rest while the Empress and the generals sat together. "Originally, I was going to personally welcome your Majesty, but a few days ago, Great Xia started to attack Ping City. I had no choice but to stay here and send Captain Lin Yaoqi to welcome your Majesty. Please forgive me, your Majesty," Hongwu said. "It doesn't matter." The Empress waved her hand. "Your Majesty." Hongwu first apologized, then couldn't help but say, "We were really too rash this time." The Empress coldly waved her hand and said, "You don't have to say any more, I know what I'm doing." She had a strong aura, but one of her hands was pinching her fingers in her sleeves. How could she not know that she was rash this time? She just didn't want to hear it from others. Furthermore, she had just chosen him as her husband, and he was already poisoned to death. Furthermore, he was poisoned to death. How could she put her face? Furthermore, she didn't want to see Rinpochen die. After all, in so many years this was the first time someone had moved her heart. It was the first time she felt her heart palpitate with excitement. It was just that she couldn't tell outsiders about these things and her maiden feelings. Hongwu looked at the Empress for a long time and could only sigh in his heart. Her Majesty had changed. In the end, he had no choice but to ask, "Your Majesty, did your journey go smoothly?" The Empress tilted her head and thought for a while before replying, "It could be considered smooth. Is there any army intercepting at the Falling Moon Gorge?" The Empress sneered, "There's someone called Jia Yugong and the Zhumu elders. The 2 of them have been waiting for decades and were lucky enough to enter the top 10 in the world. They actually dared to plot against me." Hongwu was slightly taken aback. The Zhumu elders were indeed troublesome to deal with. They were actually invited by Great Xia. After news of the Empress beating up Hua Sanlu in the 9 pavilions came back, he knew that Her Majesty definitely used a secret technique to stimulate her bloodline. She definitely hadn't recovered yet. Looking at her aura just now, she indeed hadn't recovered. She wasn't even at 50% of her peak condition. If she encountered the Jianghu elders, it would be difficult for her to escape. However, at this moment the Empress was sitting here safe and sound. Immediately he asked, "How are the two of them now?" "Of course I sent them to look for Hua Sanlu." The Empress snorted. Everyone in the hall was shocked. On this trip, not only did the Empress kill Hua Sanlu, but she also killed the Jianghu elders who had just entered the top 10. Even Hong Wu found it difficult to deal with the two of them when they joined forces. If Rinpochen was here, he would definitely jump out and say, "Your Majesty is well versed in both literature and martial arts. Dongfang Bubi is the only one who reigns supreme." However, this group of people actually only cared about exclaiming in admiration and didn't have anyone to flatter her. Therefore, the Empress always felt that Dongfang Bubi was more likable. Hong Wu was also surprised. However, it wasn't good to ask about this matter. It was better to ask the winged cavalry later. "Your Majesty is mighty," Hong Wu finally said. Following which, everyone in the hall cheered, "Your Majesty is mighty." Lin Yaoqi's troops were completely wiped out. What happened? Hong Wu asked again. Not only did he want to know about this matter, but the others also wanted to know about it. "You can ask the winged cavalry later." The Empress shook her head slightly. Lin Yaoqi's troops were ambushed and completely wiped out on the way. She wasn't willing to talk about this matter. After a few more words, the Empress said, "I'm tired. All of you can leave first. We will discuss this matter tomorrow." After everyone left, only Hong Wu was left standing at the same spot. "Great General, is there anything else?" When the Empress was alone with Hong Wu, her attitude was much friendlier. "I would like to ask if the rumor that Your Majesty poisoned everyone from the 9 pavilions and the 4,000 people at Mount Lianin is true?" The Empress nodded. "Was it Deputy Prefect Ren's doing?" Hong Wu could be said to be one of the people who understood the Empress the most. Perhaps there were some things that he wasn't clear about, but he was certain that the Empress didn't know how to use poison. The Empress thought for a while. It should be his doing, so she continued to nod her head. "Your Majesty, this person's methods are really dangerous. Furthermore, as far as I know, he has seen the Bichi before. I'm afraid it's not appropriate for him to stay by your side," Hong Wu said. Even though Rinpochen looked weak and couldn't even defeat a child, it was indeed terrifying to poison thousands of people to death. Furthermore, he was by the Empress's side. However, looking at Her Majesty's previous attitude, he could only persuade her in a roundabout way and hope that she would reconsider. "This is my personal matter. I already know about the Bichi incident. There's no need to mention this matter again." The Empress's face turned serious. Seeing this, Hong Wu knew that he couldn't persuade Her Majesty anymore. He could only helplessly say, "In that case, I will send Your Majesty to rest." The Empress nodded her head slightly. Seeing the Empress walk into the room, Hong Wu withdrew his gaze and sighed after a long time. At this moment, his mood was even more complicated than watching his daughter grow up to be played with by a pig. At first, he didn't take that person seriously. But now, he felt that he wasn't as simple as he thought. Chapter 222. In the morning, Hong Wu and the generals from the Protectorate of the North learned about what happened along the way from the winged cavalry. Everyone was amazed by that unknown poison. If they had this thing, they could just throw it at the imperial capital of the Great Xia dynasty when the war started. Then, they heard the winged cavalry warriors talk about the walkie-talkies, binoculars, night vision goggles, and the device that could fly into the sky and take pictures of the enemy setup as if it was witnessing everything with its own eyes. 3 of the 6 binoculars in the hands of the winged cavalry warriors were immediately snatched away. A group of people stood on the rooftop and used the binoculars to take a look. Then, they nodded their heads solemnly and switched to the next one. When it was the third person's turn to hold the binoculars, he refused to budge no matter what. The people next to him tried to stretch their hands out a few times, but they were all beaten down by him. He was still laughing there, making the people next to him have goosebumps. "Let me see." The person next to him was so angry that he snatched the binoculars and kicked him off the roof. Then he put his eyes on the binoculars and was shocked at first. It was so clear. Something that was originally very far away was actually so close. Whose family was this little girl? He was actually taking a shower in the courtyard. So white. The general smacked his lips. "What young lady? Let me see, let me see." The surrounding people immediately scrambled. Hong Wu held his binoculars and looked into the distance. He had a pensive look on his face. These things were quite useful, and it seemed that they were all taken out by that brat. It seemed that he would have to ask him for some. She didn't consider whether Rinpochen would give it to her. After all, the winged cavalry had quite a few of them. As for whether he liked Rinpoche or not, it was even less important. He had to take what he had to take, especially when it was something that had various uses for the military. The two armies were separated by thousands of zhang. If they could see each other's flag signals, they would be able to respond in time. Also, what was the name of that thing that could communicate freely within thousands of zhang? Bring me that walkie-talkie, Hongwu instructed the person beside him after thinking for a while. On the morning of the next day, the Empress was still resting in her room. She was a little tired from the battles that happened a few days ago and the constant running. Now that she was back in a safe place, she did not want to move after waking up. She lay on the bed and stared blankly at the ceiling. When was the last time he lazed in bed like this? It had been a long time, so long that she couldn't remember. Ever since he moved into that empty palace, he had never been here. Even if she didn't attend morning court, every time she woke up and saw the cold and empty surroundings, she didn't want to continue lying down. Your Majesty, it's time for lunch. Rinpoche's voice came from outside the door. The Empress shifted her gaze and ignored him. However, after Rinpoche persevered and knocked on the door for a long time, a pillow directly smashed through the door and sent him tumbling. When Tengji, who was far away, saw this, he immediately shrunk his neck. Fortunately, he did not go and call for help. When the guards of the general's residence saw this scene, they subconsciously shifted their gazes away. After a short while, they shifted their gazes back to Rinpoche. He had been lying there all this while, and no one knew if he had been knocked unconscious. Rinpoche opened his eyes and looked up at the sky. Even though he was hit by the pillow, it was made of wood. Although it seemed like the force of the impact wasn't weak, it actually didn't hurt when it hit his body. He looked at the blue sky and white clouds above him. He smelled the Empress's fragrance on his pillow and was in no hurry to get up. It smelled good. It smelled like some kind of flower. Rinpoche placed the pillow on his face and deeply smelled it. It was indeed very fragrant. Oh! Rinpoche felt as if someone stepped on his stomach and immediately cried out in pain. Then the pillow disappeared, leaving behind only a gust of fragrance. The wooden basin filled with water that Rinpoche placed at the door just now also disappeared along with it. Bang! The door was slammed shut as well. The surrounding guards couldn't stop snickering. Such is life. Rinpoche sighed. He suddenly recalled the time when he had just graduated from high school. Every night he would play games and sleep like a log during the day. At that time he had a dog at home called Xiaoxi. It was a shetty. Every day, not long after he fell asleep, it would jump on his stomach or step on his face to wake him up and bring him out for a walk. Unfortunately, that dog only stayed at home. Just like him, it would run back home within 2 seconds after he let go of the leash. That kick just now reminded him of the feeling when Xiaoxi jumped on his stomach. He got up from the ground and patted his clothes. The ground here was paved with stone slabs. The air in this world was good and it wasn't dirty at all. He patted his clothes subconsciously. When he was done patting, the Empress walked out of the room. She was still wearing that gorgeous red traditional Chinese dress. Her hair was tied up simply, which was more suitable for this dress than letting her hair down. Her pair of phoenix eyes were filled with killing intent as she glared at Rinpoche. Your Majesty, it's time for lunch, Rinpoche said as he stood at the side. Lunch was specially prepared by Rinpoche. These days, as long as he didn't return to Earth, he would settle the Empress's meals. Seeing that the Empress hadn't woken up in the morning, he asked the guards for directions to the kitchen and cooked a few dishes. Speaking of which, the food in the general's residence was really terrible. When he ate the meal in the morning, he almost thought that it was for the odd job workers. After asking, he found out that Hongwu also ate such food. He ate whatever the food in the barracks was like. Should he say that Hongwu wasn't picky or that he was strict with himself? Rinpoche always felt that as a person, regardless of whether it was a man or a woman, he should treat himself better. For example, there was no need to make things difficult for himself. 1 plate of stir-fried wild vegetables, 2 plates of meat dishes, and a bowl of mutton soup. The Empress sat at the table and looked at the food in front of her. She said faintly, "Take a seat too." When they were on Earth, the two of them didn't need to pay so much attention to each other. However, over here, Rinpoche still had to be more or less mindful. When in Rome, do as the Romans do. The Empress did so on Earth and he did the same here. After lunch, the Empress met Hongwu again in the afternoon. She asked him about the problems at the border and the recent situation in Great Xia. This time she didn't avoid Rinpoche, but he wasn't too interested. He stood there with lifeless eyes. No one knew what he was thinking about, but it definitely had nothing to do with the things they were talking about. Deputy Prefect Ren. Hong Wu's voice woke Rinpochen up. Great General, Rinpochen hurriedly asked. Those binoculars and walkie-talkies are very useful for the border. Do you still have them? Hong Wu asked in a deep voice. His gaze was fixed on Rinpochen's face. His face didn't show much expression, but Hong Wu's imposing manner from his many years on the battlefield made Rinpochen a little uncomfortable. The binoculars will take a few more days. After the glass factory is built, we can start producing them. I will think of a way to get the walkie-talkies. Rinpochen nodded. If they could be produced in this world, then there wouldn't be a need to bring them over from Earth. Rinpochen wanted to bring a lot of things, but unfortunately he could only bring a few things. However, he definitely had to bring the walkie-talkies and solar chargers. Also, can I take a look at the one that can fly in the sky? Hong Wu asked again. Sure. Rinpochen looked at the Empress and nodded. After a while, a courtyard was surrounded by people. The imperial bodyguards were pushed outside, and no one knew what was going on inside. Rinpochen was surrounded by a group of people. He adjusted the drone and began to climb into the sky following his operation. The surrounding people immediately exclaimed in surprise. This thing actually flew. Rinpochen controlled the drone and circled around the city. Within 1.7 kilometers, it was able to send pictures back via the ground station. The delay wasn't too big either. Everyone squeezed behind Rinpochen and looked at the pictures displayed on the screen in amazement. It was as if they had seen it with their own eyes. Pfft. Not long after, someone started to chuckle softly. Through a window, a man and a woman were doing something that was related to the survival of the Aboriginals. Many people made up their minds to close the windows, and close the windows. Chapter 223. After staying in Ping City for a day and 2 nights, everyone prepared to set off the next morning. Yesterday he left the solar-powered charger, the remaining 3 binoculars, and a few walkie-talkies to the Protectorate of the North, as well as a drone. On the way out of the city, Rinpochen turned around and waved at a bearded man with a swollen face among the generals who had come out to send them off with a hearty smile on his face. That bearded man actually wanted to use a beautiful maid to exchange for a drone. He was truly a genius. Furthermore, he even dared to ask Rinpochen in private. Rinpochen really admired his audacity. Yes, not only did the bearded man think about it, he actually said it out loud. It could be seen that he was truly a sentimental person. There was a reason why there were so few Aboriginals. The result was predictable. No one knew when the Empress had appeared. That big beard was embedded into the wall, and it was impossible to dig it out. However, everyone's attitude toward Rinpochen was much warmer last night. After all, the good stuff that Rinpochen took out really made them envious. Once again, the number of winged cavalry warriors in the group had increased to more than 1,300. Among them, one group was intercepted by the Great Xia army, and more than half of them were killed or injured. The other 2 groups also suffered some casualties. It was unknown where Hong Wu found a carriage. It wasn't considered luxurious, and it followed behind the Empress unhurriedly. At night, the Empress could also rest in it. During the day, the carriage was too bumpy. It was even more uncomfortable than riding on Chishue's back. For the next few days, they traveled during the day and found a town to rest at night. Everyone was now completely relaxed. Rinpochen had nothing to do, so he continued to tell the Empress about the investiture of the gods. After a few days, he finished telling her about the journey to the west. When he talked about creating havoc in the heavenly palace, the Empress looked at him from the corner of her eyes and asked calmly, "Do you want to learn from that monkey? Actually, Horse Protector is a good job. You don't have to work and you still get a salary. The 5 insurances and 1 housing fund are not bad at all. Isn't it a good thing to have time to bask in the sun?" Rinpochen forcefully ridiculed the monkey and concluded, "Monkeys are wild and hard to tame. I'm different from him. 5 social insurance and 1 housing fund are enough. It would be best if I could just get paid and not work. Since you feel that the Horse Protector one is good, you will be in charge of Chishue from now on," the Empress casually said. That's great. Rinpochen was still very interested in Chishue. If he had the opportunity to draw a vial of its blood back to Earth, he wondered what kind of results could be obtained from it. I wonder if there are dragons in this world. He didn't know that there was one in the palace of the Great Xia dynasty. After half a month, everyone finally saw a black wall appear on the horizon. That was Lan City. Since 3 days ago, the mounted scouts in Lan City had been arriving one after another. All the officials in the city had been waiting for the Empress to return. As they walked forward, they saw a large crowd of people standing outside the city gate. Almost everyone in the imperial court, except for those on duty, had come out to welcome them. Rinpochen jumped down from Chishue's back and climbed onto another mount. It would be too ostentatious to ride the same horse as the Empress in front of all the court officials and commoners in the city. This time the Empress didn't stop him. In the eyes of the Empress, Hongwu was different from the others. She wanted to make her stand clear. Your subjects welcome your majesty. At the city gate, 200 to 300 people were shouting in unison. Behind them, there were many commoners who were watching the commotion. They wanted to catch a glimpse of the Empress, but they were separated by the soldiers. The Empress nodded her head slightly and said faintly, "It has been hard on all of you during my absence. Let's return to the palace." The commoners on both sides of the city were standing by the roadside to watch the commotion. When they saw the Empress sitting on Chishue's back, they cheered incessantly. The Empress was very popular in Deyo. Furthermore, it had already been more than 20 days since the Empress defeated Hua Sanlu and destroyed the 9 pavilions. News of this had already spread to Lan City and the commoners. The commoners didn't know the reason why the Empress went to the 9 pavilions, but they cheered for her bravery. At this moment, the Empress was slowly moving forward on Chishue's back. She was welcomed by the cheers of tens of thousands of people, making her look exceptionally dazzling. Those commoners wanted to see the Empress. Some of them even took a look at the radiant Rinpochen who was following behind. Everyone returned to the palace. The Empress went to the throne room to discuss matters while Rinpochen went straight back to Pingle Park. This could be considered his home in this world. Other than the Beast Park, this was the place he had stayed in for the longest time. After returning, he immediately felt relaxed and at ease. He threw himself onto the bed, rolled around, and immediately fell asleep after a wave of drowsiness. Meanwhile, in the throne room, everyone started talking about how the Empress abandoned the entire imperial court to go to Great Xia. Almost everyone in the imperial court started to make things difficult for her. The Empress's face immediately turned cold. "Are you guys trying to rebel? We don't dare to. It's just that your majesty is the ruler of a nation, yet you abandoned millions of people in Deyo and went to such a dangerous place for one person. This behavior is really inappropriate. If I can't even protect one person, how can I be an empress?" the Empress said coldly. "But we are really worried about your majesty's safety." "What's there to worry about? Is there anyone who can stop me?" the Empress sneered. "In that case, why did your majesty say that if you can't come back, we will find that person and bring him back?" Shi Qing said. The Empress was momentarily speechless. How could she not know the dangers of going to Great Xia? It was only right for her to leave behind such an explanation. However, at this moment, when Shi Qing said it, she immediately lost her composure. She was silent for a while, then flew into a rage out of humiliation. Her entire body erupted with an imposing aura that blotted out the sky and covered the earth. Like a tsunami, it pressed down on everyone, forcing them to take a few steps back. "Your Majesty," everyone said in unison. With a cold face, the Empress gradually withdrew her imposing aura. After a moment of deliberation, she opened her mouth and said, "In the future, unless it's necessary, I won't easily put myself in danger." However, these words were as good as not saying anything. If it was necessary, she would still do what she had to do. In any case, she gave both parties a way out. In fact, everyone already knew that this would happen. It would be strange if the Empress admitted her mistake. However, what needed to be said still had to be said. At the very least, they had to express their attitude. Otherwise, what would they do if the Empress acted more recklessly in the future? This time, everyone was almost anxious to death. "Where's Taiyan?" Seeing that everyone had calmed down, the Empress immediately shouted for someone to come out. "I'm here." Immediately, a man who was shorter than the rest but very sturdy stood out. This was the head of the Public Security Bureau, Taiyan. Back then, when Rinpochen was ambushed, he was the one who hurriedly led people to investigate the scene. "Have you found anything?" the Empress asked coldly. Taiyan knew what the Empress wanted to ask without saying it clearly. He immediately replied, "Your Majesty, the 4 people that day were kamikaze warriors. I couldn't find many traces of them. The weapons and crossbows they used and the clothes they wore were all produced in the Yun nation. During this period of time, I didn't dare to relax for even a moment. Finally, I found out that they came from Great Xia to the Yun nation and then from there to Lan City. Their lodgings were arranged by a shopkeeper in Lan City from the Yun nation with the surname Su. I have already thrown all the members of the Su family into prison. However, after interrogating them, they almost didn't know anything. It was arranged by the shopkeeper after receiving a sum of money from the other party. In other words, you only know that they came to Great Xia and nothing else? The Empress asked coldly. Your Majesty, please forgive me for my incompetence, Tai Yin said. Continue to investigate. I will give you another 3 months. I want to know who has such guts. Chapter 224. Ren Baqin slept for more than 2 hours. After he got out of bed, he stretched his body and called for someone to prepare a medicinal bath. His strength had not increased for a long time. Now that he was back, he could finally enjoy the pleasure of rapidly increasing his strength. An increase of 15 kilograms in a week was already very fast for him. In 1 month it would be 60 jin. In 2 months, it would be 120 jin. In 3 months, his strength would be more than 300 jin. Just thinking about it made him a little excited. After soaking in the medicinal bath, Ren Baqin felt that the Empress should be tired from the journey. After the meeting, she should be resting in Yangxin Palace Hall. As such, he returned to his room and waited until it was almost time for the Empress to have her dinner before heading to Yangxin Palace Hall to meet her. Along the way, everyone rolled their eyes at him. Even though the Empress had returned, they were still on tenterhooks. Ren Baqin was the main culprit. When they arrived at Yangxin Palace Hall, the Empress was still yawning. It seemed like she had just woken up. Your Majesty, how was your rest? Ren Baqin asked. The Empress shook her head and remained silent. She still looked a little sleepy. Ren Baqin knew that it had been hard on her these days. Beside him, Qin Yuan brought a chair over. Ren Baqin sat on it for a while and told the Empress about one thing. The sweet potatoes planted in the beast park had already matured. It was time to dig them up and see how they were doing. Is it the grain that can produce 5,000 kilograms per mu that you mentioned? The Empress was much more clear-headed after hearing this. Yes, it's hard to say if it can produce 10,000 caddies per mu, but it should be around 6 to 7,000 caddies. The most important thing is that it's not picky. It can be grown on any kind of land, even on a mountain, Ren Baqin said. Very well. After the morning court session tomorrow, I will bring some people over. The Empress nodded her head. Food was a big deal, especially when it came to high-yielding crops that could be grown anywhere. Dayo didn't produce a lot of food, and it didn't import a lot of food from other countries either. Dayo completely relied on animal husbandry. Especially in the mountains, they mainly relied on hunting and picking wild fruits and vegetables. If this kind of sweet potato was really as Ren Baqin said, it would really be very useful. Your Majesty, do you have any farmland? Ren Baqin asked another question. What's that? The Empress was slightly puzzled. In other words, the imperial plantation belongs to His Majesty. Ren Baqin explained. The seasonings that he planted should have matured by now. Furthermore, he was also preparing to plant some other things such as cotton, which could be used to make cotton cloth. He couldn't just rely on the 1 or 2 plots of land in the beast park. They were completely useless. This world belongs to me, the Empress said. However, it was only after hearing this that Ren Baqin realized that the imperial family of Dayo actually didn't have exclusive farmland. It was really unexpected. She didn't have any farmland, and she only had 2 merchant caravans that were mainly responsible for purchasing goods from the various countries. It was no wonder that the Empress lived a simple life. However, this was also because the previous emperors didn't put much thought into it. After all, the conditions in Dayo weren't considered good, and they didn't have the capital to be extravagant. However, didn't the former emperor of Dayo consider that he couldn't afford the monthly salary of the palace maids? No wonder there were so few palace maids in the palace. Who does the land outside Lan City belong to? Ren Baqin asked. They have all been distributed to the meritorious soldiers, the Empress replied. Can I buy some? Ren Baqin looked at the Empress, and the Empress looked back at him with her clear and bright eyes. However, her eyes were filled with confusion. When Ren Baqin saw this, he thought to himself, forget it, the Empress really doesn't know anything about this. I better ask someone else. Later I will ask someone to see if I can buy some. Later I will plant some seasonings and sell them. The profits will be huge, Ren Baqin said. You make the arrangements, the Empress said indifferently. She really didn't care about these things. Your Majesty, where does the imperial family's income come from? Ren Baqin still felt that he should ask. The Empress replied without hesitation. The imperial family has some gold and silver mines. Ren Baqin then knew where the imperial family's money came from. He really didn't know much about the mines in Dayo, but he assumed that the imperial family didn't have much. He still had to think of more ways in the future. In that case, your majesty, rest early. I won't disturb you any further. Rinpoche cupped his hands and left. The next morning he left the palace and headed to the beast park. It had been 2 months since he last came to the beast park. Standing at the entrance of the beast park, he felt a little sad. When he first came to this world, he was still thinking about how to earn money. He even started a shaved ice shop with caretaker Sure. In just a few months, who would have thought that things would turn out this way? It wasn't that he didn't understand, but the changes were really too fast. This time around, Rinpoche didn't have 2 people following him. Instead, he had a total of 10 people surrounding him. It looked rather imposing. When he entered the beast park, he saw caretaker Sure swaying around like a crab from afar. When he saw this group of people, he quickly came forward to welcome them. When he saw Rinpoche, his face revealed a look of surprise. Deputy Prefect Ren. Caretaker Sure greeted him. Rinpoche's current status was different from before. He didn't dare to address him as brother anymore. If Her Majesty knew about this, she would skin him alive. Caretaker Sure, I can finally come back to take a look. Rinpoche was all smiles. It was still that familiar smell, that familiar formula, and that loud voice that sounded like a loudspeaker. Deputy Prefect Ren, you are always welcome to come and take a look. Caretaker Sure patted his chest and said, how are the 2 plots of land? Rinpoche first asked. This was his target this time around. There are people taking care of them, but the seasoning seemed to have matured. Caretaker Sure's answer made Rinpoche very satisfied. How are Tian Tian and Gun Gun? Rinpoche asked. After not seeing them for such a long time, he still missed them a little. They have grown fatter. I will bring Caretaker Ren to take a look. Caretaker Sure laughed. Rinpoche nodded his head and walked side by side with Caretaker Sure. Along the way he saw many familiar faces. Some of them used to be his odd job workers. There were also Ting Hulu and Tai Dao. They all greeted him from afar. Rinpoche didn't say much. In his heart he planned to ask these 2 people to come over. After all, he still wanted to ask about the land. He couldn't possibly do it himself, right? There were also some miscellaneous matters that could be handled by these 2 people. It was still the same house that he used to live in. However, the entrance was surrounded by a fence. Tian Tian was standing on Gungun's body and was looking inside through the window. It was probably wondering why Rinpoche had not returned after such a long time. When it noticed that someone was coming over, Tian Tian turned around clumsily and fell off Gungun's body. Rinpoche pushed open the courtyard door. The 2 little chaps stared blankly at him for a long time before recognizing him. They slowly crawled to his side, hugged his legs and begged for food. Rinpoche touched the 2 little chaps. Indeed, they were much fatter than before. They were almost the size of a ball and appeared more honest and adorable. Rinpoche decided to bring these 2 little chaps back to Pingle Park. It was quite fun to see them when he had nothing to do. It was just that their teeth were a little sharp and didn't know how to control their strength. Tian Tian accidentally scratched the back of his hand with her teeth. He was so angry that he gave her a slap on the head. After teasing the 2 little chaps, Rinpoche stood up and left. He followed Caretaker Sure to the field to take a look. From afar it was a stretch of green. First he went to the sweet potato field. He got someone to take a shovel and dig along the roots of the vines. He immediately pulled out a bunch of sweet potatoes that were stained with mud. The big ones were the size of a fist. The small ones weren't much smaller either. Rinpoche lifted them with his hand and estimated that they weighed at least 5 to 6 kilograms. He got someone to dig another 2 places. Both places yielded a lot of sweet potatoes. These 3 places yielded more than 10 kilograms of sweet potatoes. This plot of land could yield at least 6 to 7,000 kilograms of sweet potatoes. It was considered to have met his expectations. Looking at the pile of sweet potatoes, Rinpoche was in a good mood. After all, this was the change that he had brought to Dayo. He said to Caretaker Sure, get someone to wash them. Get the kitchen to steam half of them and roast the other half. Someone will come over in a while. Following which, he went to another field to take a look. The pepper, anise, sesame and cumin were indeed ripe. Some of them had fallen into the ground. It was just that the people in the beast park didn't know how to harvest them. They were afraid that they would spoil them, so they left them alone. Instead, they collected the ones that fell to the ground and waited for Rinpoche to come back and deal with them. Rinpoche stayed by the field until it was almost noon. Only then did he see a group of people coming over from afar. Chapter 225. There were quite a lot of people behind the Empress. Rinpoche recognized Great Elder Shi Qing, Junior Elder Zhikohai, Minister of Revenue Tu Wan, Imperial Treasurer Guyu, Minister of Works Tang Jinya, and a few others. Among them, Renbachien recognized those who were wearing sunglasses that cost 20 yuan that they bought from street stalls. They wore branded sunglasses and each of them resembled a gang leader. They stood out from the crowd like a crane among chickens and were extremely eye-catching. Everyone in the Beast Park was shocked when Her Majesty brought so many high-ranking officials with her. They didn't know what was going on. Your Majesty. Everyone. Renbachien greeted everyone. The Empress nodded. Tang Jinya was all smiles. After all, Renbachien was fine now. The glass factory and other things that Renbachien mentioned could be resumed. Ever since he heard that the Empress and Renbachien returned safe and sound, he immediately ordered his subordinates to gather all the things that Renbachien mentioned. He even brought back 3 carts of coal. Even though one cart couldn't transport much at this time, it showed how much importance he placed on this matter. Therefore, apart from the Empress, he was the one who was most concerned about Renbachien's life. Besides Tang Jinya, Renbachien was surprised that Great Elder Shiqing also smiled at him in a friendly manner. Great Elder and Hongwu were the pillars of Dayo's commoners. In fact, this was indeed the case. Hongwu had been guarding the border for many years and prevented Great Xia from advancing. He even made a name for himself in the Protectorate of the North. Shiqing had been in the imperial court for many years and had done many practical things for the benefit of countless commoners. His reputation in Dayo was extremely high. Renbachien was surprised to see such a person express goodwill to him amidst a crowd of people. In addition, even though Shiqing looked old, he held great power all year round. His imposing manner, coupled with his sunglasses, immediately reminded Renbachien of those Hong Kong and Taiwanese movies where the big boss patted his henchman's shoulder and said, "Do well, I have high hopes for you." Deputy Prefect Ren, how is the sweet potato you mentioned? The Empress asked. Bringing so many people here was indeed a big deal. On the other hand, it was to boost Renbachien's prestige. If there were any mistakes, the Empress would lose face and Renbachien would be in trouble. Your Majesty, it has ripened. We can dig it out and weigh it now. I have also dug out some for the kitchen to cook. Everyone please have a taste. All right, let's begin. Now, it all depended on how much this 1 mu of land could produce. While everyone was digging in the Beast Park, everyone waited quietly at the side. Before they came, His Majesty said that he wanted to see the new crop, but no one knew the details. However, Dayo wasn't a big agricultural country, and the Aboriginals mainly ate meat. Crops weren't as important as animal husbandry, so they didn't pay much attention to it. A new crop could only add 1 more dish to the plate. However, those big shots who were wearing sunglasses thought more. After all, they had seen the solar hearthstone previously and felt that it wouldn't be an ordinary item. As time passed, piles of sweet potato tubers were dug out from the ground and piled up to the side. An old man wearing a third-ranked official robe didn't care about the mud. He picked up a few sweet potatoes from the ground and examined them. At this time, someone brought over 2 pots of steamed and roasted sweet potatoes. Everyone have a taste. This thing tastes pretty good. Renbachien said to everyone. He took out a roasted sweet potato and peeled it in the middle, revealing the reddish-gold interior. A fragrant and sweet smell assailed their nostrils and could be smelled from afar. Everyone had been standing in the imperial court for the whole morning and felt even hungrier after smelling the sweet potato. They looked at each other and then at Renbachien. Renbachien presented the peeled sweet potato to the Empress and said, "Your Majesty." The Empress took it and sized it up. The skin didn't look very clean, but it smelled fragrant and sweet. It was very appetizing. Usually, the food that the Empress ate would be tested by someone before being handed to her. However, she didn't care about the food that Renbachien handed to her. After all, no one tested it for poison on Earth, so she wasn't guarded against him. She opened her pearly white teeth and took a bite. Her eyes brightened up. This thing tasted really good. Everyone couldn't stop her in time. Seeing the Empress eat it, they looked at Renbachien twice. I'll try. Tang Jinya didn't hesitate. Since Her Majesty had already eaten it, why would you be afraid of poison? Give me one as well, Shiqing called out from behind him. In an instant, the roasted sweet potatoes were all grabbed by a bunch of big hands. The rest of the people had no choice but to get steamed sweet potatoes. Everyone took a bite. With the sweet potatoes in their mouths, they nodded and said, "Not bad, not bad." This thing smelled good and tasted good. It was soft, fragrant, and tasty. A bunch of big shots in the imperial court surrounded the sweet potatoes like a bunch of old farmers. They nodded and praised the sweet potatoes incessantly. The scene was extremely lively. What's this called? Someone asked after eating a few bites. Rinpoche noticed that it was the official who went forward to check the sweet potatoes just now. He had some guesses about his identity. I call it a sweet potato. In fact, it should be called a sweet potato, Rinpoche said. How long does it take to ripen? 3 months. Furthermore, it's not picky about the land. It can be planted after clearing a piece of land on the hillside. It's very easy to take care of, Rinpoche said. How much can 1 mu of land produce? That official asked again. You will know after weighing it in a while, Rinpoche said. However, you can't eat too much of this thing. You have to eat it with other food. Otherwise you will get a heartburn. That official nodded and didn't say anything else. His pair of bright eyes stared at the pile of sweet potatoes. Based on the current situation, the number of sweet potatoes wasn't small. He had a guess in his heart, but he didn't dare to believe it. At this moment, after eating and looking at the pile of sweet potatoes that had been dug out, the rest of the people started to look forward to it. According to what Deputy Prefect Ren said just now, these sweet potatoes were not picky about the land and could be planted anywhere. This was very important. Coupled with other food, the lives of those villages in the 60,000 mountains would be much better. Furthermore, there would be one more type of good food on the table of the commoners. Very soon, almost all the sweet potatoes in the field had been dug out. Someone moved the scale to one side and weighed the sweet potatoes. Rinpoche was originally prepared to go over and help with the calculation. He was very confident in the mathematical ability of the Aboriginals. Who would believe that a group of more than 10 people would have to count with their fingers? However, he stopped in his tracks when he saw the people from the Ministry of Revenue. The Ministry of Revenue should be more reliable. 3,163 pounds, 3,752 pounds, 4,860 pounds, 5,925 pounds, 6,451 pounds. Every time a number came out from the mouth of the people from the Ministry of Revenue, everyone's heart would skip a beat. They were afraid that they had calculated wrongly, and all of them gathered around to take a look. Even the voice of the people from the Ministry of Revenue was trembling when they announced the number. They even suspected that they had calculated wrongly. There was too much. Too much was dug out. Previously, no one would have thought that there would be so much. Currently, the yield of rice outside the city was only 500 to 600 caddies per mu, but this thing was actually more than 6,000 caddies. 10 times 10 times. Chapter 226. 6,451 caddies. It was confirmed 3 times in a row. The official who first checked the sweet potato stared at it nervously, fearing that he would make a mistake in his calculation. After confirming that the number was correct, everyone was in an uproar. It was too much. This product called sweet potato was not picky and could be eaten as a supplementary food. Furthermore, the yield was so high that it was 10 times higher than rice. If it was about the same or slightly higher than rice, no one would care. However, it was so much higher and the value was different. As long as the cultivation of sweet potatoes continued, Dayo would not need to buy food in the future. The secondary class, rank 3 official who checked the sweet potato laughed heartily. Congratulations, Your Majesty. This sweet potato is very useful for Dayo. We will no longer have to worry about food shortage in the future. Everyone turned to the Empress with a joyful look on their faces. The Empress was in a good mood after listening to everyone's comments. Rinpoche did not drop the ball. The yield of more than 6,000 kilograms per mu was already amazing enough. She looked at Rinpoche and said, "You have made a great contribution to this sweet potato." "Thank you, Your Majesty." Rinpoche thanked her timely. Although it was not very useful to him, after all, getting promoted and getting rich was meaningless to him now. However, it was a good thing to be able to raise his status in the imperial court and among the people of Dayo. However, the yield of more than 6,000 kilograms per mu was not a surprise. It was said that this sweet potato could produce more than 10,000 kilograms per mu. Dayo's land was also very fertile, but the final yield was only about 6,000 kilograms. It was a pity that he did not know much about this area and only looked up some information. However, he still remembered that sandy soil should be better than this kind of solid land. Gui Hong, ask Deputy Prefect Ren about this sweet potato and expand the cultivation as soon as possible. The Empress instructed. Yes. Gui Hong was the secondary class, rank 3 official who checked the sweet potato previously. He was under the Ministry of Works and was in charge of agriculture and animal husbandry. He understood the current situation of Dayo's agriculture better than anyone else. Naturally, he knew the astonishing yield of this sweet potato. Your Majesty, there is still the matter of the glass factory in Mount Damo. Tang Jingye quickly stepped forward and said. He immediately pushed Gui Hong to the side with his butt sticking out. Although the sweet potato was important, he still had a lot of things to do. Previously, Rinpoche gave him a big pie. He could only see it but not eat it. He had been thinking about it for a long time. Now that Rinpoche was finally back, how could he let Rinpoche farm? Gui Hong was so angry that he glared at him. However, the other party was the Minister of Works, and he was only the Minister of Agriculture and Animal Husbandry. Of course, at this level, even if Tang Jingye was his immediate superior, it wasn't that important. The most important thing was that he couldn't defeat him. You can discuss it later. In her heart, the iron mine at Mount Damo was still the most important matter. However, she didn't know much about it, so she let them make their own arrangements. Tang Jingye gave Rinpoche a sinister smile that he thought was extremely kind. After looking at it, everyone had an idea in their hearts, so there was no need to stay any longer. The group of people prepared to leave. Gui Hong pointed to the field not far away and asked what was there. Spices, Rinpoche answered simply. For the time being, he was going to get a plot of land to plant it and then go to those 3 countries to earn money. This thing was absolutely profiteering. The money he earned could also be used to buy other supplies and fill up the palace's treasury. In a few years he would slowly open up the cultivation of seasonings. Upon hearing that it was spices, Gui Hong's eyes lit up. He excused himself to the Empress and immediately ran over. There were many new spices in the palace, and all the court officials had heard of them. After all, they had appeared at the Empress's birthday banquet. Although the dishes at that time didn't look like much, they tasted extremely good. Everyone could immediately taste the difference. It was just that there were some in the palace and basically no one else knew about it. Everyone had only heard of it but had never seen it before. After hearing that it was spices, many people were interested. The large group of people moved to the vicinity of that plot of land and walked around for half a day. However, they didn't know much about these things, so they just watched for fun. After asking for half a day and hearing that the imperial family would buy land to plant and sell it, they could only look forward to it. In any case, it was fine as long as they could buy it. There was no need to grab everything. Even if they wanted to grab it, could they snatch it from the Empress? After walking around for a long time, Gui Hong couldn't help but say, I still feel that Deputy Prefect Ren should come to the Department of Agriculture and Animal Husbandry. It just so happens that the Department of Agriculture and Animal Husbandry is still lacking a junior minister. The sweet potatoes and spices that Rinpoche produced made him feel that Rinpoche definitely had other good things in his hands. It would be a pity if he couldn't poach them to the Department of Agriculture and Livestock. Everyone looked at him sideways. They had seen shameless people, but they had never seen such a shameless person who lied with his eyes wide open. The Assistant Minister of the Department of Agriculture and Livestock is busy every day, and you treat him as if he doesn't exist with just one sentence? If Rinpoche really went to the Department of Agriculture and Livestock, what would you do? Create 2 assistant ministers? However, seeing how he ignored everyone's disdainful eyes and remained calm and composed, many people felt that this shameless look was similar to their demeanor in the past. After staying in the Beast Park for half a day, everyone left one after another. Tang Jingye kept asking Rinpoche when he was going to the Ministry of Works, and Gui Hong kept asking about the situation of the sweet potatoes. With great difficulty, Rinpoche finally followed the Empress back to the palace for his meal. After sitting in the garden with the Empress for a while and enjoying the peace, he ran to Qingxin Palace Hall to look for Lin Xiaola to learn how to write. Previously he was assassinated halfway through learning and now he had forgotten a lot. At night he made another trip to Qingxin Palace Hall. Following which, both of them appeared in the room on Earth. At this time it was already June on Earth and it was starting to get hot. Rinpoche opened the door to the room to ventilate. Looking at the time, it was only 7 o'clock in the evening. He turned around and said to the Empress, who was habitually hugging her legs and sitting on the sofa, Zixiao, do you want to go out for a walk? In summer, the city is much livelier and more beautiful than in winter. All right. The Empress nodded. In this world, other than buying red dresses whenever she saw them in the shopping mall, she didn't have any objections to the itinerary. After all, everything in this world was very novel to her. In particular, the peaceful and affluent atmosphere of this world made her feel exceptionally comfortable and at ease. She never had to think about other things, and all the complicated matters in the imperial court were far away from her. The night in the city at the end of spring and beginning of summer was very beautiful. The entire city gave off a feeling of vitality. The roadside was filled with pedestrians taking a stroll. There were teenagers wearing headphones, people dancing in the open space, young mothers pushing strollers, and young parents holding skewers in their hands while taking their children out on the streets. When the Empress first came, there weren't so many people in the city at night. Rinpoche drove to the supermarket to buy a bunch of things and stuff them into the car. The Empress hugged a bucket of popcorn and suddenly felt that it was pretty delicious. Chapter 227. After placing the things in the car, Rinpoche and the Empress walked to a plaza not far away. From afar they could hear the music coming from the plaza. There were also many people surrounding the plaza. When they got closer they could see dozens of people dancing in the plaza. The rhythm was very cheerful. Even though some of them were old, there were more young people. They were sweating profusely as they danced in a pleasing manner. Needless to say, there were a few girls with good figures. They were already wearing shorts at the beginning of June. Rinpoche only took a glance at them before he felt a murderous aura permeating the air. He immediately turned his head and saw the Empress looking at him coldly. Both of them looked at each other for a while. The Empress turned her head slightly and continued to eat her popcorn. "What's that?" the Empress asked casually. She had seen them a few times on the way here, but she didn't really understand what they were doing. Plaza dancing. Plaza dancing? Showy but impractical, the Empress said indifferently. A row of question marks appeared in Rinpoche's head. Following which, he looked at the movements of those people and realized that it really looked like plaza dancing. Only then did he come to a realization and immediately held back his laughter. The commoners usually exercise when they have nothing to do. Most people don't usually exercise. After a long time their bodies will rust. Rinpoche didn't expose the Empress's misunderstanding and casually explained. This was a scene that only existed in modern society. In ancient times or that world, commoners had to run around every day to fill their stomachs. They didn't have time to care about other things. At the same time, modern society used all kinds of machinery which greatly reduced manual labor. Many people sat or lay down every day except on the road. As a result, various kinds of exercise methods were developed. After listening to Rinpoche's explanation, the Empress could understand this point after thinking for a while. This kind of improvement in the pursuit of life was also something that she was most envious of. Only when civilization developed to a certain level could it appear. The word civilization was taught by Rinpoche. Rinpoche walked past this group of people and saw another group of people dancing in the square a little further away. They were mainly elderly people and their movements were much slower. The boundless horizon is my love, flowers are blooming at the foot of the continuous green hills, what kind of rhythm is the most swaying? This demonic voice drilled into their heads, and Rinpoche hurriedly moved further away. Inside there were many people out for a walk at night. There were even children skating on roller skates. A few teenagers on skateboards were doing all sorts of things not far away. When they saw a beautiful woman in red looking at them, they immediately performed some tricks. Their every move revealed the words seeking attention. Then they slipped and knelt on the ground, immediately causing a burst of laughter. Rinpoche and the Empress walked on this lively public square. They even saw a woman in her 50s teaching a few youngsters how to fight. Her movements weren't fast, but they were very soothing and pleasing to the eye. He watched from the side for a while. From their words, they seemed to be participating in some kind of competition. What do you think? Rinpoche wanted to hear the Empress's opinion on martial arts. The Empress shook her head and didn't say anything. He was too weak and didn't need to be evaluated. Furthermore, this kind of fighting technique that was used by ordinary people wasn't very meaningful to the commoners of the Aboriginals. The Aboriginals had been living in the 60,000 mountains, fighting with wild beasts and fighting for territory among the villages. They had long developed a set of martial arts and moves that were suitable for the Aboriginals. The two of them walked around in circles on the public square. Suddenly, a man in his 30s stopped them. "Excuse me, do you want to make a movie? I have a movie that is currently lacking 2 roles, and one of them is the female lead. I think both of you are very suitable, especially this lady. If you are willing to participate, you will definitely rise to fame and enter the entertainment industry." Rinpoche thought that he was a scammer. There were too many such cases on the internet. However, after taking a closer look, he realized that the man was in his 30s. His hair was a little long and messy. He was wearing a cap and carrying a bag. He looked very sincere and pleasantly surprised. It was as if he had finally found the person he was looking for after searching for a long time. "I'll give you 99 points for your acting. I'm missing 1 point because I'm afraid you will become arrogant." Rinpoche laughed. My name is Du Ruffing. This is my name card. I'm really the director. I have meticulously prepared for this movie for several years. Now that everything is ready, all that's left is the female lead. That man quickly took out his name card from his pocket and handed it to the Empress. However, the Empress didn't even bother with him. She turned her head and looked at Rinpoche. Her eyes were filled with questions like, "Can I send him flying now?" Not interested. Rinpoche immediately waved his hand. The two of them turned around and left. This man seemed to be genuine. He was indeed a director. He was indeed very imaginative. It was a very creative idea to let the Empress be the female lead. You can consider it more. With your image, it would be a waste if you don't act in a movie. As long as you stand there, you don't need to speak and the audience's eyes will be on you. Du Ruffing didn't give up and moved closer to the Empress. Rinpoche quickly grabbed the Empress's wrist. Otherwise, Du Ruffing would be sent flying in the next second. Bang! Du Ruffing was still sent flying. Everyone present didn't see how the Empress made her move. Her movements were really too fast. I say, if you want to fake an accident, you should at least act more realistically, right? Nowadays, no matter what you do, you have to be professional. How are you going to earn money if you're not professional? You were sent flying without even touching him. Furthermore, isn't this flying too exaggerated? Rinpoche was shocked and despised. Originally, the Empress's appearance had always been attractive. At least half of the surrounding people's gazes were on her. At this moment, this unforeseen event happened, and many people were watching the commotion. After hearing Rinpoche's words, many people started to ridicule him. Indeed, if you could send someone flying so far, it would be more likely if the boxing champion was here. You moved closer to the Empress and then flew yourself. Did you think that everyone else was a fool? Let's go, Rinpoche said to the Empress. Just like that, the two of them minded their own business and left. After the two of them left for a long time, Du Ruffing was still lying there motionless. When someone went over to take a look, they realized that he had fainted. However, no one thought that it was that extremely beautiful lady in red who had hit him. After all, there were so many people watching at that time. It wasn't just one or two people who were peeking at the Empress. Rinpoche and the Empress walked one round around the square and received countless envious and jealous gazes. Only then did they return to the house. Do you like this place? Do you think we should buy this house or change to another place to stay? Rinpoche asked casually when he entered the house. He was considering whether to continue staying here or change to another villa. It seemed to be a good idea to buy a place to stay in Jianghu. The air there was good and it was like spring all year round. Most importantly, there were bikinis. This place is also not bad. The Empress didn't know what Rinpoche was thinking and casually said. After all, she had stayed here since the first time she came to this world and was already very familiar with it. Furthermore, she didn't have many requirements for a house. This kind of small house was actually more to her liking. It was much better than seeing an empty palace when she woke up. In that case, let's buy this place. Rinpoche nodded. Since this landlord had been renting out the house all year round, he would probably sell it. After that, he would go to Jianghu to buy a house. After putting down the things, Rinpoche took out a set of checkers that he had just bought and sat on the sofa to play with the Empress. In Rinpoche's heart, this kind of board game was second only to Gamoku. The Empress played it for the first time. Then, she immediately flipped the table. Boring, the Empress said with disdain. She picked up the remote control and turned on the television. Rinpoche looked at the chess pieces that had been smashed into powder on the table and didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Originally, he was prepared to win a few games first and then slowly go easy on her to create the illusion that she was improving very quickly. Reality proved that he was absolutely thinking too much. How about we play Gamoku? Rinpoche suggested tirelessly. The Empress didn't even bat an eye. She directly threw the remote control to him and said, "I want to watch a movie." Although I like her very much, I still didn't tell her. Because I know that what I can't get is always the best. If a relationship could be won or lost, I don't know if she would win. But I am very clear that I lost from the beginning. In the past, I thought that sentence was very important. When I said it, it seemed like it would last a lifetime. But now that I think about it, it's not a big deal. Some things will change. If one day I can't help but ask you who is the person you like the most, please lie to me. No matter how unwilling you are, please tell me that the person you like the most is me. The Empress switched off the lights. The light from the television flickered on and off on her face. Listening to the lines from the movie Evil in the West, the Empress looked pensive as she hugged a pillow. Then she turned her head to look at Rinpoche. She then turned her head back to watch the movie in high spirits and stuffed a piece of chocolate into her mouth. On the other hand, the more Rinpoche listened to the lines, the more he regretted choosing this movie. At first he thought that it was quite a classic. But now that he looked at it again, what kind of messy lines were these? People are always unaware of what they have. Only after they have lost it they can't forget it. That's why there are few happy people and many sad people. In fact, many times it's enough to just hold on to what you have, Rinpoche said with a deep look, intending to distract the Empress. He made up his mind that from today onwards, Wang Jiawei would live a life of darkness. Chapter 228. Boss, 2 bowls of tofu pudding, 2 trays of steamed buns. Rinpoche and the Empress attracted a lot of attention when they walked into the breakfast shop. It would be normal to see such a woman in a 5-star hotel, but it was strange to see her in a small breakfast shop. Sweet or salty? It's salty. Rinpoche answered matter-of-factly. There's even savory tofu pudding in this world? Can that thing be eaten? Sweet. The Empress couldn't understand other words, but she could understand this sweet. Rinpoche and the Empress looked at each other. After a while the tofu pudding was served. The Empress frowned when she saw the thick braised soup. However, she still took a sip and found that the taste was pretty good. After breakfast, when they were driving past the plaza, the Empress suddenly said, "How about building 2 such plazas in Lan City?" Yesterday she walked around the square with Rinpoche. The ordinary people there were either exercising or having fun. Their leisurely attitudes and satisfied expressions made her feel that having such a place in the city wasn't bad. That's possible, but it doesn't make much sense. In fact, the infrastructure of many cities is more important. I see that many places in the city are still dirt roads, and there are puddles of water everywhere after the rain. The drainage system in the city relied on the ditches, and if it rained heavily, the ditches would often flood. Currently, it was difficult to transform Lan City. It was even more troublesome than rebuilding a city. Why don't we build a new city like this after we earn money? Rinpoche pointed to the surroundings. Then we'll gradually transform the old city into twin cities. The prerequisite is that we have to make money first. Rinpoche turned his head and said. The more he talked, the more he deviated from the topic. Unknowingly, he changed the topic from building a plaza to building a new city. Both of them actually didn't find anything wrong with it. However, Lan City was a remnant of the former Hao nation, and its facilities were too backward. It was much easier to build a new city than to renovate it. Furthermore, they could plan all kinds of facilities from the very beginning. Especially after making cement, it would be very easy to build a city. It was no longer like before, where they had to cut out rocks from afar to grind and transport them over a long distance. The only problem was the imperial palace. It was not easy to rebuild the imperial palace, especially those gardens. Of course, this was just a city and didn't have much significance to Dayo as a whole. If he wanted to rapidly improve the infrastructure of Dayo, he would need an astronomical amount of money. To change Dayo as a whole, there was still a long way to go. It wasn't just a matter of money. After he went back, he would create a comparison table between Chinese characters and Dayo characters within a short period of time. Then, he would recruit a few people to translate some basic scientific knowledge into Dayo characters and train a batch of students. After a few years, this batch of students who had learned some basic physics and chemistry would be the spark. If everything depended on him, he would die earlier than Zhuge Liang. He would die of exhaustion. The two of them wandered around the earth for 3 days and finally returned to Yangxing Palace Hall with bags of various sizes. 2 drones. He had bought 5 drones in a short period of time. Even the boss of the specialty store knew him. As for the solar energy storage battery, he brought along 2 small storage batteries. Rinpoche was actually optimistic about a type of storage battery that could store 3.6 kilowatt-hours of electricity and the supporting equipment. It would be sufficient for the lighting, electric fans and other equipment in Yangxing Palace Hall. It was a pity that it was too heavy. The entire set, including the packaging, weighed 70 kilograms. He could only bring it next time. This time he brought 20 walkie-talkies with him. It would be convenient for him to communicate with others. For example, if the Empress wanted to look for Rinpoche, she could directly use the walkie-talkie. It could be used as a mobile phone within a short distance. This time around he wasn't using the mass-produced walkie-talkies. This time around he was using a branded walkie-talkie. It could be used as a mobile phone within a short distance. After returning to Yangxing Palace Hall, Rinpoche first adjusted the 2 specially prepared walkie-talkies. These 2 were the most expensive and had the most powerful functions. They could even monitor other channels. He handed one to the Empress and carried the other one. At the same time he left a solar energy storage battery with the Empress. Only then did he get someone to carry the bags back to Pingle Park. Rinpoche went back to his room and lay on his bed for a while. He took out the walkie-talkie and called the Empress. When he heard some noise coming from the other side, Rinpoche spoke into the walkie-talkie, "Your Majesty." After a while, the Empress's voice came from the other side, "What's the matter?" At this moment Hong Yuan and Qing Yuan, who weren't far from the Empress, widened their eyes and looked at the small orange box in the Empress's hands. Furthermore, it was Deputy Prefect Ren's voice? Rinpoche pondered for a while. He was just bored and teasing the Empress. If he were to speak the truth he would probably get beaten up. Hence he said, "I tried to use the signal. Now that I have tested it, good night, Your Majesty." The other side immediately switched off the walkie-talkie. Rinpoche grinned and placed the walkie-talkie aside. He first entered the visualization of water, to cultivate. After a while he woke up and fell asleep on his bed. Meanwhile, in Yangxin Palace Hall, the Empress stared blankly at the walkie-talkie in her hands. The corner of her mouth curled up slightly. It seemed that this palace hall wasn't that cold and desolate anymore. She waved at Qing Yuan and Hong Yuan, "Both of you can leave now." After placing the walkie-talkie aside, she lay down on her bed. Early the next morning, Rinpoche brought along a stack of papers that recorded the craftsmanship of cement and the characteristics of various ores. He left the palace and headed to the Ministry of Works. 10 tall and strong imperial bodyguards surrounded him. Rinpoche's small body was immediately submerged in the crowd. It was as if he was surrounded by a wall. The guards of the Ministry of Works had a deep impression of Deputy Prefect Ren, who was assassinated the moment he left the Ministry of Works. Furthermore, Tong Jinya had specially taken care of Rinpoche. Rinpoche was invited in the moment he arrived at the door. Tong Jinya had already been waiting in the room when he received the news. "Sir Minister." Rinpoche cupped his fists and greeted. "The things that you mentioned previously have been brought back. Let's go and take a look first." Tong Jinya impatiently pulled Rinpoche out. He had been waiting anxiously for a long time. At this moment he didn't even want to say a word of nonsense. Tong Jinya pulled Rinpoche all the way to a room at the back of the Ministry of Works. Then he stopped, pointed to the front and said, "The things that you want are all here." Rinpoche didn't know what the room in front of him was used for previously. Now it was completely empty. There were piles upon piles of all kinds of things. There were limestone, gypsum stones, clay, feldspar, dolomite, and there was even a pile of coal at the side. Rinpoche didn't really understand these things previously. He could only rely on the things recorded on the papers in his hands to distinguish them. It seemed like there wasn't any problem. He hoped that the ores in this world weren't too different from those on Earth. "Do you have iron ore?" Rinpoche turned his head and asked. "How much do you need?" Tong Jinya asked in a deep voice. "Just a little. 1 cartload will do," Rinpoche said. Iron ore powder was needed to make cement. However, this material could be produced at the Mount Liutsue iron mine. He didn't mention it previously, but now that he was going to make it, he needed it. Now, the first thing he had to do was to burn some of the cement according to the formula that he had obtained from the internet. He wanted to see if there were any differences from those on Earth. If there were any problems, he would have to try to adjust the formula bit by bit. That would be a little troublesome. When there were no problems with the cement formula, he could prepare for the large-scale mining and transportation of materials for production. "Yes. Is there any place in the city with clay kilns?" Rinpoche asked again. "There aren't any in the city, but there are some outside the city," Tong Jinya replied while stroking his beard. Chapter 229. He instructed the Ministry of Works to send the ore to the kiln outside the city to be crushed. Rinpoche made an appointment the next day to go to the Department of Agriculture and Livestock to look for Gui Hong. He instructed him on how to germinate sweet potatoes, how to plant them and where to plant them. At present, they had already tried the yield and taste of sweet potatoes. Therefore, they didn't have any doubts about this new product. All Rinpoche had to do was to recite the information and let them memorize it. He didn't need to worry about anything else as they would naturally do it. Furthermore, even if all the sweet potatoes germinated, they could only be sown on 100 mu of land. After generations of cultivation and a small amount of sweet potatoes were put on the market, the ordinary people in Dayo would gradually accept it. When the yield of sweet potatoes increased, they would then take out sweet potato wine and sweet potato vermicelli. There were also some things to pay attention to. For example, sweet potatoes could only be planted once a year on the same plot of land. After that, other crops had to be planted. For example, eating too many sweet potatoes would cause heartburn. At the same time, Rinpochen also brought two other crops. One was potatoes. The yield was lower than sweet potatoes. It could yield about 2 to 3,000 caddies per mu. The other was pumpkin seeds. The yield was similar to that of potatoes. These two crops and sweet potatoes had a high starch content. They could be used as a vegetable or as a rice. Furthermore, the yield wasn't low. They were excellent as a non-staple food. It could be said that with these three crops, Dayo would no longer have to worry about food shortages in a few years. In fact, 10 years later, the grain production of the other countries would increase greatly. After all, these few countries were close to each other. These crops could easily drift to other countries. To Rinpochen, 2 to 3,000 caddies per mu wasn't a shocking number. However, when Guihong heard that these two crops could produce 2 to 3,000 caddies per mu, he opened his mouth wide and was speechless for a long time. Then he looked up to the sky and laughed endlessly. He shook the dust off the beam and landed on both of their heads. A few days ago, if someone said that the crops could produce a few thousand caddies per mu, he would probably laugh 3 times and get someone to chase the person out. It was simply a fantasy. However, after seeing the sweet potatoes being dug out from the ground and weighing more than 6,000 caddies, he would attach great importance to anything that Rinpochen took out. Bah! Rinpochen patted the dust off his head with all his might. Just now, his entire head and face were covered with dust, but the main culprit, Guihong, was already at the door in a flash, leaving Rinpochen to dig himself out from the ground. Rinpochen did not look much better after dusting off most of the dust on his body. He was so angry that he glared at Guihong. Even though Guihong was a secondary class, rank 3 martial artist, and he was only a secondary class, rank 5 martial artist, Rinpochen was not afraid of him. There was still a woman standing behind him. There was a saying that a successful man had the shadow of a woman behind him. Rinpochen felt that this saying wasn't wrong at all. Even though he wasn't successful yet, there was still a shadow behind him. Guihong didn't care, and his expression didn't change. Rinpochen kept staring at him, but he acted as if he did not see it. Instead, he asked Rinpochen how to grow potatoes and pumpkins and what he needed to pay attention to. Even though Rinpochen was angry, he still had to finish what he had to say. Otherwise, he would have to make another trip back. Rinpochen explained the main points and precautions for growing potatoes and pumpkins. One of the most important points was that Dayo often ate mutton, and pumpkins couldn't be consumed together with mutton. After he finished explaining, Rinpochen didn't stay any longer and quickly bade farewell. Deputy Prefect Rin, why don't you come to the Department of Agriculture and Livestock? It just so happens that we are still lacking a junior official. Deputy Prefect Rin is the most suitable for this position. Guihong still wanted to persuade Rinpochen. At the door, an official wearing a secondary class, rank 4 official uniform looked at him with a hidden bitterness, just like an abandoned wife. Not interested, goodbye. Rinpochen left without another word. Even now he still felt that there was dirt in his mouth. Sir. After Rinpochen left, the junior official of the Department of Agriculture and Livestock still looked at Guihong with a hidden bitterness. Sigh, if he can come to the Department of Agriculture and Livestock, I can resign from my position and hand it over to you. Guihong didn't look ashamed at all. Instead, he patiently tried to persuade the junior official of the Department of Agriculture and Livestock. The junior official of the Department of Agriculture and Livestock rolled his eyes. As if you can decide. At this position you can't just recommend someone. In the morning, Rinpochen came out of the palace clean and tidy. In the afternoon he returned to the palace dejected. He hurriedly took a bath and went to Qingxin Palace Hall to learn how to read. At night he stayed in his room and strolled around the courtyard. He raised his head and looked at the 2 moons in the sky, one big and one small. The big one was slightly bigger than the one on Earth. Its color was slightly red. With the naked eye, not only could he see the traces of craters, but he could also see a small dot in the middle. What's that? Rinpochen was puzzled. In the past, he didn't notice it when he occasionally raised his head. Today he took a closer look and discovered the small dot. He quickly ran into his room to take a look again. The 10x binoculars allowed him to see more clearly. He raised his binoculars and looked up. Indeed, it was much clearer and the moon was much bigger. He carefully searched for the dot that he saw just now. It was an oval object on the moon. He didn't notice it before. Now that he used the binoculars to look at it, it was as if there was an eye there. It made him feel a little weird, as if someone was looking at him. However, Rinpoche also knew that this was impossible. He reckoned that it was some strange landform. If he had the opportunity, he should get an astronomical telescope to see what the moon in this world looked like. Of course, this idea was only on a whim. He would completely forget about it the next morning. Sitting on a stone bench in the garden, Rinpoche took out his walkie-talkie and called the Empress. After a while he heard some noise. The other party had picked up the walkie-talkie, but the Empress didn't speak. Instead, she waited for him to speak. "Your Majesty, I see that the moon tonight is really beautiful, so I want to tell you." Rinpoche thought for a long time and finally came up with this sentence. If one were to describe his current behavior, it was similar to a primary school student who liked to secretly pull the braids of a girl sitting in front of him. However, it became harassment through the walkie-talkie at night. In the end, he was still too free now. After all, on Earth he could still watch movies or surf the internet. In this world he had nothing to do. At this time he didn't want to cultivate, so he simply used the walkie-talkie to idle around. After he finished speaking, he was still waiting for the Empress to reply when he realized that the other party had directly turned off the walkie-talkie. Rinpoche looked bored. Finally, he looked at the sky at a 45-degree angle and said, "This is life." After standing in the courtyard for a while, he turned around and returned to the house to cultivate. Meanwhile, on the roof of Yangxin Palace Hall, the Empress was lying on it. She held a wine pot in one hand and poured it into her mouth from time to time. Looking at the two full moons in the sky, her face was slightly red. It seemed that the alcohol had gotten to her head, and her eyes were slightly blurred. "What is Her Majesty looking at?" Qin Yuan and Hong Yuan were looking at the roof at a 45-degree angle. "I don't know. Recently, Her Majesty has been getting weirder." "But recently Her Majesty rarely gets angry." Qin Yuan's words made Hong Yuan nod her head incessantly. Furthermore, recently Her Majesty wasn't as cold as before. Sometimes she would even reveal a trace of a smile. This kind of change made the two of them very happy. Bang! Half a tile directly fell on the ground near the two of them, giving them a shock. They quickly covered their mouths and didn't say anything. They looked at each other and their eyes curved. The Empress looked at the moon for a long time, but she couldn't tell what was so beautiful about it. However, her mood wasn't bad. There was a kind of warm feeling, and at the same time, something was surging in her heart. This made her like it very much. Chapter 230. The next morning, Rinpoche went out to meet up with Tong Jinye, Feng Ho, and Zhahongba from the Department of Ordnance. The group of people, along with their guards, went straight to the east of the city. Rinpoche rode the fork-horned cow, the most common mount on the plains of Dayo. From time to time, it would twist its buttocks as if there were nails below it. This thing was indeed uncomfortable to ride and was much worse than the mountain-gazing bird. However, riding the mountain-gazing bird in the crowd required a lot of courage. Not to mention the déjà vu of a BMW riding on an Alto. The faint but pungent smell was enough to push most people far away. This was the first time Rinpoche walked in the direction of the east gate of Lan City. After leaving the east gate and walking for 2 incense sticks, he turned north for an hour and saw a small hill. From afar he could see black smoke rising from it. When he got closer, he saw a wall that was as tall as a person surrounded by rocks. Right in front of it was a cold and cheerless gate. This was Jingtian Furnace. The iron ore from Mount Liutsue would usually be smelted in the small town outside the mountain before being transported here like the iron ore from Mount Damo. When the guard saw them from afar, he opened the gate. After everyone entered, they saw a large open space with scattered piles of iron ore, copper ore, and a large pile of dried firewood. The ores that Rinpoche saw at the Ministry of Works yesterday were also transported here and piled up in piles at the side. Someone was crushing them. A few fierce-looking burly men first placed the limestone ore on a metal plate. Then, with a slap, it immediately turned into a pile of small fragments. After a while, a pile of gravel appeared on the metal plate. Then, someone transported it to the other metal plate. A huge stone roller was placed on top of the metal plate. It was similar to the roller in front of a road roller. 2 people, one on the left and one on the right, pushed the huge stone roller forward, turning the gravel into a pile of even smaller gravel. Then they pushed it back. After a few times, there was a piece of stone powder and a small amount of slag on the metal plate. Then someone took it to the side and used a sieve to sift out the powder. When everyone turned their heads to look at them, the people from the Ministry of Works hurriedly came out to greet them and lead them inside. Rather than calling it an earthen kiln, it would be more accurate to say that it was a cylinder made of mud. It had a diameter of 2 meters and a height of 3 meters. After placing the iron ore inside, a large amount of firewood was placed inside to melt it. The speed was very slow, and a relatively rare kind of firewood called burning wood was needed to push the temperature to the point where the iron could be melted. Then the molten iron would flow out through a trough at the bottom. The iron obtained in this way was very soft and contained a lot of impurities. It also required a blacksmith to beat the impurities out after heating it up for a long time. It could be said that this method of smelting and forging iron was quite inefficient. Not only was it time-consuming, but it also consumed a lot of firewood. As Rinpoche walked, he listened to the official from the Ministry of Works explaining the process here and nodded to show that he understood. However, as Rinpoche walked in, he saw a few furnaces with huge boxes that were as tall as a person placed beside them. Someone was constantly pushing the boxes into the furnaces. It was the bellows that Rinpoche and Feng Ho had mentioned previously. With this bellows, the temperature in the furnace has increased significantly and the speed of smelting iron has also increased. I still have to thank Deputy Prefect Ren. Feng Ho nodded and said to Rinpoche. The official from the Ministry of Works looked at Rinpoche after hearing this. From Feng Ho's words, he could tell that this blower was suggested by him. When will the other bellows be ready? Feng Ho asked the official from the Ministry of Works. They will be ready in 2 days, the official quickly replied. Have the raw materials for the cement been prepared according to the proportion? Rinpoche asked Tongjinya. Tongjinya looked at Feng Ho looked at Jianghu, and Jianghu looked at the official. Sir, are these the stones that were delivered yesterday? They have been prepared according to the instructions, the official quickly replied. Rinpoche looked at the few of them and saw them looking at one another. He felt that he might as well have asked this official from the start. How should I address you? Sir Deputy Prefect, I am the supervisor of Jingtian furnaces. You can call me Taimu. If you have any questions you can ask me. Taimu cupped his fists and said. The husband chosen by the Empress was the only one in the imperial court who wasn't an aboriginal. Anyone could recognize him. Needless to say, he was an official in Lan City. Bring the raw materials for the cement over. Rinpoche nodded and said, let's see what the results are. Following which, someone brought the raw cement powder over. Rinpoche took a look and saw that it was filled with the sifted powder. After that, he found an empty furnace and added firewood to it. Then he filled a hollow pillar made of clay with small holes with cement and placed it into the empty furnace. After a while, thick smoke rose from the top of the clay furnace and spread in all directions. Everyone retreated to a distance to watch. In order to make the temperature meet Rinpoche's requirements, there was another person in the thick smoke who was covering his nose and blowing the bellows. He coughed from time to time and was replaced by someone else. How long do we need to burn this? Tongjinya asked. It shouldn't take too long. It will be fine as long as the temperature is met. Rinpoche wasn't too sure either. The information he obtained only mentioned what happened to the cement at a certain temperature, but it didn't say how long it would take. Let's try to make bricks, Rinpoche said as he looked at the surrounding empty clay furnaces. Originally he was going to build a brick furnace after the cement was burned. However, looking at this clay furnace now, Rinpoche felt that he could give it a try. In any case, he had nothing to do. They had already retrieved the clay for some time. Even though it wasn't dried, it had been weathered for a long time and should be enough to make bricks. Following which, the craftsman of Jingtian furnace followed his instructions and poured the clay powder into the trough. Then they stirred it into a mud-like state. Following which, they kneaded out pieces of brick embryos and placed them around the walls of the clay furnace. After which, they added wood to the middle and started to calcine it. I'm afraid this will take about 10 days to burn. Don't cut off the fire in the middle, Rinpoche said to Taimu. Taimu promptly noted it down. Up until now, he still didn't know what these big shots wanted to do with the clay. In any case, they would do as they instructed. Currently, there was nothing much to do in Jingtian furnace and it would be idle for at least half a month. The firing of the cement was very fast. Before the sky turned dark, the fire was extinguished and the temperature was lowered rapidly. Then they took out the clay jar and poured the cement on the ground. Originally, it had already been sintered into lumps. When it fell to the ground, it broke into small pieces. Everyone looked at Rinpoche. Was this the cement that was similar to stone that he mentioned? Rinpoche squatted beside that pile of clinker and used his hand to grab a handful of it. In his hand, there were some glass-like crystals that were sintered at a high temperature just now. This is a gem? Feng Ho was astonished at first. Following which, he revealed an expression as if he had discovered a huge secret. When it was sent in just now, it was clearly clay. How could there be gems in it after it came out? Even though it was very small and fragmented and wasn't worth much, it was still a gem. It was much more valuable than this clay. Even though it didn't turn into stone like what Rinpoche said, if it could produce gems from the clay, it would still be a big step forward. But immediately, everyone's imagination started to run wild. Where was this clay dug from? Tomorrow they would send someone to dig the clay. Chapter 231. In the garden, the Empress was in a daze as she looked at a small white flower not far away from her. Someone seemed to have told her that this flower was outstanding. When she recalled the serious look on that person's face at that time, she suddenly laughed. Rinpoche turned around and asked Hong Yuan, "Where did Deputy Prefect Rin go?" "Deputy Prefect Rin went to the Ministry of Works," Hong Yuan answered. The Empress nodded slightly. Soon after, she recalled something and said to Qing Yuan and Hong Yuan, "Get someone to use the Yinyao to inform the General-in-Chief who supports the nation to find Lu Qi, Lu Pinghai and bring the item back. As long as he's willing to trade, he can ask for anything." "Yes," Hong Yuan hurriedly replied and hurriedly left. In Jingtian Furnace, Tong Jinye, Feng Ho, and a few others took the crystalline particles in the cement and placed them under the sun to examine them. They emitted all kinds of rays of light and confirmed that they were indeed not gems. However, they really did look like gems. Mix the gypsum powder and these stones according to the ratio of 3:97. Rinpoche continued to instruct the craftsmen of Jingtian Furnace to mix the cement and clinker. If there were no problems, this would be cement. As for the specifics, they would know once it was mixed with coarse sand, mixed with water and left for a night. Everyone brought the cement and coarse sand that had been mixed evenly with the gypsum powder all the way back to the Ministry of Works. They couldn't wait to find a place in the backyard to pour the cement and coarse sand together according to the ratio, then add water and mix. Rinpoche found 2 stones to be used as bricks and covered the middle and 4 sides with cement powder. He was waiting to see the results tomorrow. "Alright, come back tomorrow morning and we'll know the specifics." Rinpoche looked at the sky and said. Dayo's current weather was still very hot. It could reach a temperature of 32 to 33 degrees Celsius, which made people perspire profusely. This cement should be enough for one night. After returning to the palace, the first thing he did was to head straight to Qingxin Palace Hall to learn how to read. When the sky darkened, he stood up and left. Lin Xiaola saw him stand up and shouted. "What's wrong?" Rinpoche looked down at her. Lin Xiaola looked around and then asked, "I heard from them that Her Majesty has chosen you as her husband?" Rinpoche thought for a while. That was the case. Should he be considered as marrying into her family now? Why? Lin Xiaola asked with her eyes wide open. Rinpoche spread his hands and thought, "You're really slow to react. It's been a few months and you only found out about it today? How closed off must you be? But about this question, if you ask me, who should I ask? Everything happened too quickly." The wheel of fate rolled forward and he was in a daze for a long time. "You're so ugly and weak. I can knock you down with just a finger," Lin Xiaola said with a look of disdain. "Why would Her Majesty choose you?" Rinpoche's face darkened immediately. Could they still converse? He stretched out his finger and poked Lin Xiaola's forehead. If he knew how to use the 6-pulse divine sword, he would definitely buy you today. No wonder you don't have any friends. It's been a few months and you only know about it now, Rinpoche said with a look of disdain. What is a friend? Lin Xiaola suddenly asked. I have seen it in many books, but what is a friend? Rinpoche looked at the little girl and suddenly couldn't bear to argue with her. At the end of the day, he was a child who grew up here and did nothing but eat and sleep every day until he was 17 or 18 years old. Her chances of making friends were lower than winning the lottery. It was as if a meteorite had hit her on the head. Wives are like limbs and friends are like clothes. Having no friends is equivalent to running around naked, Rinpoche said sincerely after pondering for a while. Lin Xiaola looked at Rinpoche and pondered for a long time. Then she said with a look of disdain, pervert. That's why I should still make a few friends if I have the opportunity, Rinpoche said. After he left, Lin Xiaola was in a daze. She had seen the word friend many times, but she never knew what it meant. Rinpoche went to Yangxin Palace Hall. Dinner was already served, but the Empress didn't move. She was in a daze and no one knew what she was thinking about. Your Majesty, Rinpoche greeted. Oh. The Empress came back to her senses and asked, How's the matter at the Ministry of Works today? There were only a few things that Rinpoche could do at the Ministry of Works. All of them were very important to Dayo, and the Empress wanted to know the progress. Actually, if she wanted to, she could let the Ministry of Works report to her. However, she wanted to hear from Rinpoche. After all, he had a better understanding of this matter. We still don't know the results. We will only know tomorrow, Rinpoche said. If it's successful, Dayo will be able to build some taller buildings. Furthermore, if we want to build city walls, we won't need to dig up stones from afar and transport them here. We can save a lot of labor. The Empress nodded her head and said, "Tell me the situation when the time comes." "Accompany me for dinner," the Empress said as she straightened her body from the couch. Rinpoche felt that she was waiting for him. With a smile on his face, he poured wine for the Empress. After dinner, Rinpoche asked curiously, "Your Majesty, don't you need to train?" He had been curious about this question for a long time. He had seen other aboriginals train their bodies every day, but he had never seen the Empress do this. Logically speaking, for her to reach this level of strength at such a young age, besides her innate talent, she should be 100 times more hardworking than others, right? However, what Rinpoche saw was not even 100-fold, let alone 100 times. The Empress shook her head slightly and said, "I'm training all the time." Rinpoche didn't understand, but he didn't ask any further. He seemed to understand and said, "So, walking, eating, sleeping, and sitting are all part of your training, right?" The Empress shook her head and explained, "I'm training all the time. I walk, sit, and lie down. The Aboriginals you see practice four-way heaven and Kismet heaven. They use their bodies as heaven and earth to train their bodies. Cardinal heaven experts are already able to control heaven and earth. Naturally, they don't need to train like them." Rinpoche understood what she meant. However, even if the Empress explained it to him, he wouldn't understand, so he simply didn't ask. "Your Majesty, do you want to play Gamoku?" Rinpoche suddenly thought of something and asked. The Empress didn't even look at him when she heard this. She had lost interest in such things after losing the previous time. It was unknown what she was thinking, but she suddenly looked up at Rinpoche and said, "Since you are so free, why don't you sing that song for me?" Rinpoche spat out a mouthful of blood. The Empress still remembered this? With a conflicted look on her face, she said, "Your Majesty, let me bring the Eru back to play Pomp and Circumstance for you." "All right. However, you have to remember that if you have forgotten, I have heard of a term that is prepared for this. It's called the crime of deceiving the monarch," the Empress said unhurriedly. Rinpoche almost knelt down when he heard this. Was this what he learned from watching the Qing dynasty drama? Indeed, he shouldn't have let her watch those messy things. "Your Majesty." Rinpoche looked up at the Empress's face and said, "How can I forget what I promised?" Only after Rinpoche left did the Empress reveal a trace of a smile on her face. She picked up the wine cup and poured it into her mouth. Inexplicably, she thought of a sentence from the movie that she watched a few days ago: "The more wine you drink, the warmer you get. The more water you drink, the colder it gets." Now her heart was warm. Chapter 232. The next morning, Rinpoche came to the Ministry of Works again and asked Tong Jingye, "Minister, how's the cement?" "Let's go and take a look together," Tong Jingye said. "I haven't had the time to see it either." They walked to the backyard but didn't see Feng Ho and Zhahongba. After all, they were officials with actual positions and had to deal with many things every day. They didn't have the time to keep an eye on a piece of cement and only needed to know the results. Tong Jingye was the Minister of Works, so he could see things further than others. Thus he paid more attention to the cement. When they arrived at the backyard, they saw a pile of cement that was mixed yesterday and a block that was used to cover the outside of 2 stones. Rinpoche stepped forward and touched it with his toes. It was very hard. "Is it done?" Rinpoche was delighted. He was most afraid that the ores in this world were different from those on Earth. After all, this was a different world and he didn't even know if they were in the same universe. Furthermore, this world had spirit swords and superior martial strength. It was normal to have some differences in the details. He tested the hardness of the cement with his foot and saw hope of success. He squatted down and pressed it with his finger. It was indeed hard like a stone. He then checked the cement that was used to cover the 2 stones. It was completely solidified and wrapped around the stones. He lifted it up and threw it to the ground with all his might. Even a corner of the stone slab was broken, and only a piece of cement was chipped. "It's done. There's no problem with the cement," Rinpoche said happily. Tong Jingye saw Rinpoche's actions and nodded his head slightly. He bent over and touched the cement block before slapping it with his palm. The pile of cement on the ground immediately broke into pieces, and a few pieces directly fell on Rinpoche's body. Rinpoche took a deep breath. He wasn't shocked but in pain. A piece of cement had directly hit his shin bone. Ouch, ouch, ouch. Rinpoche hugged his calf and jumped non-stop. It's slightly worse than the stones, but it's fine. Although a lot of materials are needed, it's much easier than quarrying, grinding and transporting them here. Tong Jingye nodded and turned to look at Rinpoche with a pained expression. He then turned his gaze away and pretended not to see it. He thought about it and felt that Rinpoche had a lot of good stuff. Perhaps there was something else that he wanted, so he apologized. I'm sorry. After jumping for a long time, Rinpoche pulled up his trousers and saw that his calf was bruised and bleeding. After thinking about it, he realized that he couldn't argue with Tong Jingye over this matter. Since the Aboriginals were so careless, he could only blame himself for being unlucky. Next, we'll store more of this cement and wait for 10 days to see how the red bricks turn out. If there are no problems, we'll build the brick kiln first. Once the furnace is ready, we can start with the production of cement and bricks. Once we can build the blast furnace. Moreover, this kind of blast furnace was also quite effective in smelting iron. It could even directly smelt steel, saving a lot of effort. In addition, cement had many other uses such as paving roads. There was no need for stone slabs and the cement could be directly laid on them. The same goes for repairing the city walls and other areas. Therefore, the more the better. In the future, the consumption of this thing will definitely not be small, Rinpoche said to Tong Jingye while rubbing his leg. I understand. I will write to Her Majesty today and ask her to assign manpower. Tong Jingye nodded. He didn't doubt Rinpoche's words. Even if Rinpoche didn't mention it, he would have thought of it in a few days. If this cement was used well, it was indeed a sharp weapon, especially for the Ministry of Works. Then he looked at Rinpoche and said, the cement that Deputy Prefect Run brought out is very useful for Dayo and the Ministry of Works. In order to thank you, I will hold a banquet for you at House Yunyan tonight. Everyone from the Ministry of Works will be there. Deputy Prefect Ren, you must come. Rinpoche nodded his head cheerfully. This was the first time a big shot from the imperial court invited him to a banquet. He didn't know if it was a sign of acceptance. After all, he couldn't always rely on the Empress and wander around the palace every day. He hoped that this was a good start so that he could quickly integrate into Dayo's imperial court. After leaving the Ministry of Works, Rinpoche went straight to the Beast Park. Not long after he entered, he saw caretaker Sher playing with the stone dumbbell. The stone dumbbell, which weighed about 25 to 30 kilograms, was flying up and down in his hands. His whole body was drenched in sweat. Noticing Rinpoche's arrival, caretaker Sher's hands trembled and the stone dumbbell was smashed into the house. Deputy Prefect Ren. Caretaker Sher didn't even take a look at the loud bang and the dust that rose up from behind him. He gave off the feeling that a real man would never turn back to look at an explosion. Caretaker Sher. Rinpoche smiled. I was still wondering when Deputy Prefect Ren would come. The shaved ice shops have earned a total of more than 400 taels of silver in the past 2 months. Also, the fans made by Deputy Prefect Ren have earned 200 taels of silver. I will just take a share of the shaved ice shop's profits. I should give Deputy Prefect Ren 450 taels of silver. It wasn't easy for me to see Deputy Prefect Ren these days. I was still thinking about how to give it to you. Caretaker Sher beamed with joy when he mentioned this matter. The shaved ice shops had earned more than 400 taels of silver in the past 2 months. Caretaker Sher also received more than 200 taels of silver. This year he would have an income of around 1,000 taels of silver. To him this was definitely a huge sum of money. Of course, what he didn't expect the most was that Rinpoche had risen again and again within these few months. From a caretaker who was 1 rank lower than him, he directly rose to the position of secondary class, rank 5 Imperial Deputy Prefect. Even this position of Imperial Deputy Prefect was not taken seriously by anyone. The important thing was that he was chosen as the Empress's husband. Thinking about the changes in the past few months, Caretaker Sher sighed. Recently, Rinpoche didn't pay much attention to this aspect. After hearing Caretaker Sher's words, he then recalled the previous mess. Even though money didn't have much meaning to him now, he was still somewhat happy to receive more than 400 taels of silver. It was not bad to use it as a reward for others. Most importantly, this business belonged to him. It was completely different from what the Empress gave him. How's the shaved ice business recently? Rinpoche smiled and asked. The shaved ice is still doing well, but we can't make that fan anymore. Now, a few shops are selling it, caretaker Sure said with slight regret. It's all right, Rinpoche replied indifferently. Originally, he wanted to say that he would sell good stuff to him in the future, but he swallowed the words when they were at the tip of his tongue. Based on caretaker Sure's status, the current business was already his limit. If he increased his business any further, it would be hard to guarantee that someone would be jealous. At least on Earth it was like that. As for the future, it would depend on caretaker Sure's luck. If he had the opportunity to give him a few pointers, he would definitely earn a lot from it. At the same time, his friendship with Rinpoche was not in vain. When the time comes, I will get someone to collect it. This time, I am here to look for 2 people from caretaker Sure, Rinpoche said to caretaker Sure. No problem, caretaker Sure readily agreed. Get Ting Hulu and Tai Dao here, I will ask them if they are willing to work for me. How can they not be willing? These days they have been thinking about Sir Deputy Prefect. They are afraid that Deputy Prefect will forget about them. Caretaker Sure laughed heartily. After a while, Ting Hulu and Tai Dao were found. When they saw Rinpoche, they greeted him happily. Are the 2 of you willing to work for me? Rinpoche looked at them and asked. Of course we are willing. Our subordinates thank Sir Deputy Prefect for still remembering us. The 2 of them were overjoyed. Working for Rinpoche was a good thing. Even in the past, the 2 of them would not have rejected him. Not to mention Rinpoche's status had risen. The 2 of them were self-aware. Their strength was rather average. If not for the fact that they had submitted to Rinpoche when he was still a caretaker, they would not have had the chance to do such a thing. That's good, this token is for the 2 of you. Look for me at the palace tomorrow morning. As for your accommodation, the 2 of you can rent a place in the city and get the money from caretaker Sure, Rinpoche said. He was the one who asked for this token from the Empress. After all, regardless of whether it was the farmland or some of his other ideas, he needed someone to do it. After meeting the few of them, Rinpoche returned to the palace. He first inquired about the Empress's location and then went to the garden. After all, he still had to inform the Empress that he was going to attend the banquet at night. Actually, there were only a few places that the Empress usually stayed at. She would either stay at Yangxin Palace Hall or the garden. Occasionally, she would go to places like Qingxin Palace Hall and the Beast Park. To Rinpoche, it was very boring. Upon seeing the Empress, Rinpoche greeted her and sat at one side with a face full of joy. Your Majesty, the cement is a success. It's a good thing, but now that you have no more rewards, I won't reward you. The Empress nodded her head and said. She had seen the tall buildings on Earth and knew more about the importance of cement than Tongjinya. Rinpoche laughed. To be able to stay by your Majesty's side is the greatest reward. After the Empress heard this, she raised her head slightly and squinted her eyes as she basked in the sunlight. She always liked to hear these words from him. The 2 of them just sat there and occasionally exchanged a few words. Most of the time they were silent. The main reason was that the Empress did not talk much and Rinpoche could not say much even if he wanted to. However, the 2 of them were very relaxed and the atmosphere was very warm. Even Qing Yuan and Hong Luan stood a little further away to not disturb the 2 of them. After lunch, Rinpoche told the Empress about Tong Jinye's invitation to attend the banquet. The Empress nodded her head and thought for a while before asking, What place is it? House Yunyan, Rinpoche replied. Well, I got it. The Empress said, Change your clothes in the evening and prepare to go. If you encounter anything interesting, tell me about it when you come back. Rinpoche then left for Qingxin Palace Hall. In the evening he changed his clothes and headed for House Yunyan. When he mentioned the location, the surrounding imperial guards had a strange expression on their faces. What? Is there something wrong with that place? Rinpoche asked doubtfully. Everyone's expression became even more strange. There was nothing wrong with that place. It was indeed a good place. The key was that the person who went there was not right. Sir, Great Xia calls that place a brothel. Su Wei, who was the leader of the guards assigned by the Empress, couldn't help but say to Rinpoche. Chapter 233. Tong Jinye, that old bastard, actually dared to invite me to a brothel? Rinpoche was on the verge of kneeling. Rinpoche thought for a while. Did the Empress know what that place was? She definitely didn't know. Who would tell her about a brothel for no reason? Should he go? Was there a need to ask this question? Of course he would go. He had never seen a brothel in this world. He heard that the women in ancient brothels were proficient in the 4 arts. He would go there to broaden his horizons. No matter how bold that old bastard was, he wouldn't arrange one for him, right? Rinpoche turned his head and looked puzzled. What's a brothel? The ignorant were innocent. Anyway, he didn't know what kind of place House Yunyan was. Your Majesty, if you want to blame someone, look for that old bastard. Let's go. We can't be late for the minister's banquet. Rinpoche called out to everyone and took the lead to rush forward. Everyone hurriedly followed and looked at Rinpoche with admiration. Why was he rushing to a brothel if he didn't know? Rinpoche didn't care what they thought. In any case, he had an excuse. Even though he knew that he couldn't do anything there, it was still a good thing to broaden his horizons and feast his eyes. However, he was so focused on broadening his horizons that he forgot a saying. Asking a gentleman how much worry he had was like a group of eunuchs visiting a brothel. Even though he wasn't a eunuch, he was probably worse off than a eunuch in a brothel. At least they could still move a little, but he didn't dare to. There was a street between Shirhu district and Wadayagu district called Jing Street, but most people called it the Four Great Courtyards Alley. There were very few people here during the day, but it was brightly lit at night. All kinds of mounts and carriages could be seen everywhere. In particular, people from other countries loved to come here when they had nothing to do, especially Great Xia's envoy, Gu Zicheng, who lingered here 20 out of 30 days a month. Jing Street was called the Four Great Courtyards Alley mainly because the four courtyards here were Baihua Courtyard, Qinghua Courtyard, Duanyue Pavilion, and Jinyu Pavilion. These courtyards were filled with gentle women from Great Xia, the Yun Nation, and the Qin Nation. They were very different from Aboriginal women. In addition to merchants from other countries in Lan City, there were also many Aboriginal people who liked to hang out here. As for the Aboriginals, not only did they have a fiery temperament, but they also knew nothing about the four arts. No one came to a brothel to look for a tigress. Furthermore, many Aboriginal women were stronger than men. Although most of them were slightly weaker than men, they were still able to hunt in the mountains. Thus, not a single Aboriginal woman could be seen in such a place. House Yunyan was the most famous building in the 100-flower courtyard. Those who entered this building were all people of status. Without a certain level of status, this building would not accept people. Furthermore, most of the women there were proficient in zither, chess, calligraphy, and painting. Apart from Great Xia, the Yun Nation, and the Qin Nation, there were also gentle women from the Hao Nation. Ordinary people could not enter this building at all, so there were the most speculations about this building, and the reputation of this building spread far and wide. Under the guidance of the imperial bodyguards, Rinpoche rode the ox and arrived at the four great courtyards after the time it took for 2 incense sticks to burn. At this point in time, the sky was getting dark and the lights in the pavilions on both sides were lit up. There were also rows of lanterns hanging on the walls of the courtyards, and the scenery was excellent. There were already many people coming and going on the streets. Most of them were people from the other 3 nations with imperial bodyguards. These people were very low-key. There were also some descendants of the big shots of Dayo who were walking with crab steps. Their bodies were emitting a valiant aura, and they did not even look at the people from the other 3 nations. In fact, they even ran straight into them. If you did not avoid them, you would be out of luck. Rinpoche looked around and saw 2 familiar faces. He seemed to have seen them during the Great Hunt some time ago. When he saw the others, they naturally saw him as well. After all, there were so many imperial bodyguards in the surroundings, and they were all dressed like imperial bodyguards. Many of them were shocked when they first looked over and thought that it could be Her Majesty. They immediately became alert and craned their necks to take a look. When they saw Rinpoche, who was surrounded in the middle, they suddenly realized that it was actually this guy. Following which, they widened their eyes. This guy actually dared to come to this place? Putting everything else aside, just this courage alone made many people give him a thumbs up. In a carriage that was moving slowly along the roadside, 2 men were sitting opposite each other. One was heroic and the other was elegant. These 2 men were Zhang Heqi and Zhang Heju from the Zhang family who followed their 5th uncle to Lan City. It's that guy. The 2 of them were surprised to see Rinpoche surrounded in the middle through the gap in the curtains. He actually dares to come to a brothel? Does Qi Zixiao know about it? Zhang Heqi looked incredulous. You 3 don't call him by his name here. Be careful not to be heard by others. Zhang Heju was also surprised, but he still warned them. There were many Dayo officials here and many of them were quite powerful. If someone heard them, the 2 of them would probably be in big trouble. Zhang Heqi shut his mouth and then said, "Do you think the Empress of Dayo knows about it?" So what if she knows or doesn't know? It has nothing to do with you and me. Zhang Heju looked at Rinpoche, who was surrounded by 10 imperial bodyguards, and said softly, At this moment, a guard who was close to the two of them seemed to have sensed Zhang Heju's gaze and turned his head to look. Zhang Heju immediately put down the curtains, afraid that they would be noticed. He is rising rapidly. We have been here for more than 2 months, but we have not made any progress at all, Zhang Heji said with jealousy. If Ren Baqian was an aboriginal, he wouldn't be jealous and would feel that it was only natural. However, he was also an outsider, but Qi Zixiao chose him as her husband. The two of them had not made any progress in Lan City for more than 2 months. In comparison, he was better than Ren Baqian in terms of appearance and knowledge. Yet Qi Zixiao chose him. How could he not feel at ease? Not only him but Zhang Heju also felt the same way. However, Zhang Heju's thoughts were deeper and he didn't reveal a lot of things. I heard that a few days ago the Empress of Deyo specially went to the 9 pavilions because of him. Even Hua Sanlu was beaten to death and the entire 9 pavilions was destroyed. It was really terrifying. However, I can also see that the Empress of Deyo really values him and is even willing to take such a risk. Ren Baqian stopped in front of a courtyard, turned his head to look around and asked, "Here?" "Sir, it's here." Su Wei nodded. Ren Baqian looked at the main door. There was no sign hanging on it, and there were 2 aboriginal burly men with sabers standing at the door. This didn't look like a brothel at all. Why did it look more like a prison? However, looking through the main door, there was a pavilion across the courtyard, and the sound of a woman's laughter could be heard from inside. However, there was a rockery in the courtyard that blocked most of the situation inside. One could hear the sound but not see anything. This made his heart itch. After getting off his mount, Ren Baqian strode in with Su Wei and a few imperial bodyguards. Naturally, there would be someone to take care of the mount. "Sir." The 2 aboriginal burly men at the door cupped their fists and greeted. Ren Baqian guessed that this place was probably opened by a high-ranking official in the imperial court. Otherwise, the aboriginals wouldn't accept employment from foreigners, let alone work as a gatekeeper. Even though his guess wasn't right, it wasn't far off. Not only the Baihua courtyard but the other courtyards were also like this. Even though they weren't backed by a high-ranking official, they were backed by the 4 protectorates. Other than the Protectorate General, the 4 courtyards were backed by the North, Northeast, Southeast and South Protectorates respectively. A portion of their income was used to purchase supplies from various countries to replenish the army. It wasn't because they were backed by the Protector Generals of the Protectorates, but because the 4 protectorates themselves were backed by the 4 courtyards. Therefore, for the past few decades, there had always been 4 courtyards in Lan City, and only 4 courtyards. Chapter 234. Ren Baqian walked around the rockery and could finally see the pavilion in front of him. It was a 3-story wooden pavilion with a wooden veranda on the outside. The veranda was covered with green tiles. Every floor of the pavilion had overhanging eaves that were covered with greenish-gray tiles. It was completely different from the rough architectural style of Deyo. Instead, it looked somewhat delicate. The pavilion was not small, and it was directly opposite the rockery where the Tang dynasty was located. The sounds of women's laughter and men's laughter could be heard. "Sir, you look unfamiliar. This must be your first time here. Sir, please come in. Would you like to sit in the main hall or in the wing room?" She was about 27 or 28 years old. She wasn't tall but her clothes bulged up a lot. She could be considered pretty and greeted Ren Baqian with a polite tone. She sized him up with her eyes and smiled. Her smile was very clean and she didn't have any makeup on her face. She was completely different from the smooth and slick brothel keeper that Ren Baqian had imagined. However, this made Ren Baqian feel a lot more comfortable. If a familiar person were to stick close to him like in the movies, he really wouldn't know what to do. Ren Baqian actually wanted to go to the main hall to take a look. His main purpose for coming here was to satisfy his curiosity. Otherwise, why would he take the risk of going back to kneel on a washboard? There would be plenty of opportunities to return to Earth. However, he still opened his mouth and asked, "Has Minister Tong of the Ministry of Works arrived?" So it's Minister Tong's guest. Minister Tong hasn't arrived yet, but quite a few people have arrived. "Shall I bring them over now?" asked the woman. "There's no hurry." Ren Baqian waved his hand. "Let's go to the lobby first. Sir Deputy Prefect." Upon hearing this, Su Wei hurriedly tried to dissuade him. "It's nothing, I'm just taking a look." Ren Baqian waved his hand and said, "This building looks quite elegant. I wonder what it's like inside." Without waiting for Su Wei to stop him, he strode forward. This was his goal. How could he miss it? There was a circle of tables in the hall, separated by screens. In the middle, there was a 3-foot-tall stage that looked like a performance stage in a bar. The hall could not be considered luxurious, but it was very elegant. It could be seen that a lot of effort had been put into everything. Potted flowers and plants could be seen in every corner. Ren Baqin walked into the lobby, scanned the structure of the building, and was slightly disappointed. There were quite a number of young and beautiful women shuttling back and forth. There were even a few women drinking wine with the men at the tables, and their laughter was like the tinkling of bells. These women were the same as the one behind Ren Baqin. They wore light makeup and gave off a clean and pretty vibe. Their smiles were also very clean and not at all slutty. However, it seemed to be a little different from the brothel scenery he wanted to see. Ren Baqin felt that it wasn't exciting enough. It was too formal and elegant. There wasn't even a seductive woman with half her breasts exposed. It wasn't seductive at all. After thinking about it carefully, Ren Baqin felt that he might have thought too much. If they really wanted to do something, there were plenty of rooms upstairs. There seemed to be no need to rush it in the main hall. Forget it, let's go to House Yunyan. Ren Baqin turned around and said to the lady behind him. Su Wei heaved a sigh of relief when he saw that he was really just glancing at him. Coming here with this person was truly frightening. If anything were to happen to him, he would be in deep trouble. Su Wei's mood worsened when he recalled that he had once heard that this person had seen a beachy. House Yunyan was located at the back of this pavilion and was next to a pool. A small stream flowed out of the pool and flowed around House Yunyan. Ren Baqin was led to House Yunyan from the side of the courtyard and went straight up to the second floor. When he opened the door, he saw that there weren't many people inside. Feng Ho, Zhahongba, Gui Hong, and 3 other officials that he didn't know were sitting inside. Beside each of them sat an extremely beautiful and gentle lady who was chatting with them. Ren Baqin's eyes lit up when he saw this scene. Greetings to all of you. I'm not late, am I? Ren Baqin smiled and cupped his hands. Deputy Prefect Ren. How can you say that you're not late? Bring me 3 jars first. Zhahongba laughed and said. The others nodded their heads in succession. Ren Baqin almost stumbled. He was just being courteous, yet they took it seriously. Furthermore, all of you drink according to the jar? If I drink it, I will be a fool today. Xiaoqingzhi, you must be joking. In my current condition, I can't even drink 3 cups, let alone 3 jars. Ren Baqin glared at Zhahongba. Everyone smiled insincerely. Their gazes were strange and it made Ren Baqin's hair stand on end. Deputy Prefect Ren, please sit here. Gui Hong called out to Ren Baqin. The seat was just beside him. There was still an empty seat which presumably belonged to Tong Jinya. If it was according to the official position, it would never be his turn to sit in that seat. But in reality, everyone really couldn't put him down. After all, this banquet was held because of Ren Baqin's cement and sweet potatoes. Furthermore, Ren Baqin had another identity. When he sat down, Ren Baqin also knew the identity of the other 3 people. One was the Xiaoqing of the Department of Ordnance, the other was Tong Yen of the Department of Works, and the last one was the Assistant Minister of the Ministry of Works, Feng Lai. Among them, the craftsman supervisor was mainly in charge of repairing houses, making official uniforms, registering craftsmen, etc. Deputy Prefect Ren, I still have to thank Deputy Prefect Ren for making the cement. In the future, it will save me a lot of effort when I build and repair houses. Tong Yen cupped his hands and said after Ren Baqin sat down. It's all for Her Majesty. Ren Baqin quickly returned the gesture. Following which, everyone casually chatted for a while. From time to time, they would tease the beautiful ladies around them. Everyone at the table had a young, beautiful, gentle, and pleasant girl beside them. If a photo of them was posted on Earth, many people would lick the screen. Only Ren Baqin was alone. This made him widen his eyes as he realized a problem. Could it be that he had been cheated? This bunch of old men actually invited him to a brothel. Then each of them hugged a lady while he stared at them? This development didn't seem right. In any case, they should have at least given him a lady to talk to. Just as Ren Baqin was wringing his head and wondering if this bunch of people did it on purpose or if they were picking ladies for him, heavy footsteps could be heard outside the door. Everyone stopped. Tong Jingya pushed open the door and said, I'm late. Sir Tong, you are the latest here. You have to drink 3 jars of wine as punishment. Gui Hong loudly repeated Zhahongba's words. Even though Tong Jingya was his immediate superior, he didn't show any mercy when it was time to run on him. Well said, well said. Tong Jingya laughed heartily and said, Why did Sir Ren do it yourself? He turned his head and shouted loudly, Bring Qing Yu and Ling Guan here. Following which, he strode into the room and sat beside Ren Baqian. He slapped Ren Baqian's shoulder and almost pushed him off the table. I'm late. I'll drink first as a sign of respect. Sir Ren is also late, Zhahongba added faintly. Ren Baqian glanced sideways at Zhahongba. Why are you staring at me? What kind of hatred and resentment do you have? Tong Jingye laughed heartily and said, Hurry up and serve the wine. Not long after he finished speaking, someone brought the wine in. Everyone had a small jar in front of them that seemed to contain at least half a kilogram. After filling up the jar in front of everyone, they continued to bring it into the room. At least 20 of these small jars were placed at one side of the room before they retreated. Tong Jingye smashed the seal and passed it to Ren Baqian. He took another jar and gestured to everyone, Give me 3 jars first. Then he raised his head and gulped it down. Ren Baqian saw that everyone was looking at him and gritted his teeth. Damn it, let's just drink. I can't pretend to be a coward before it even starts. He raised his head and took a big gulp. Then he imitated Tong Jingye and spilled half of it. The alcohol content of this wine wasn't too high. At most, it was more than 10%. This made him feel more at ease. After downing 3 jars, Ren Baqian's face turned red. Even though the alcohol content was more than 10%, he still drank half of it and almost vomited. At this moment, the door was pushed open again. 2 ladies who were even more beautiful than the lady sitting beside the others walked in. They first bowed to everyone and smiled faintly before coming to Tong Jingye and Ren Baqian's side. Tong Jingye pulled one of the ladies into his arms and pushed the other to Ren Baqian's side. Ren Baqian was immediately shocked. Even though the others were accompanied by beautiful ladies, which made him very jealous, this old man Tong Jingye actually pushed a lady to him? Tong Jingye looked at Ren Baqian's shocked expression and immediately laughed heartily. As men, as long as you don't say anything, no one will know. If Her Majesty really finds out and blames you, I will bear the consequences. Chapter 236. The Empress was bored to death as she sat in the palace. She fiddled with the walkie-talkie in her hand and didn't press the call button for a long time. She was especially bored today. However, she didn't think much of it when Ren Baqian went out to drink. After all, this was the norm. Although she had never come into contact with these things, she would occasionally hear some interesting things happening outside the palace. They were all things that Hong Luan and Qing Yuan had heard from other places and told to her to amuse her. And she was willing to drink. I wonder what that House Yunyan is like. I'll go and have a look when I have the chance. The Empress was slightly lost in thought. Apart from the palace, she had never been to any other restaurants in Lan City. Presumably, drinking in a restaurant was more interesting than drinking in the palace. However, the Empress felt that she had heard of House Yunyan before. Qing Yuan, have you heard of House Yunyan? The Empress asked casually. Qing Yuan loved to find out about those gossips and would talk about them after returning to the palace. House of Yunyan? Qing Yuan was a little puzzled as to why His Majesty would ask about this, but she still thought hard about it. After a long time, she became spirited and said, I remember now. Last time, the Minister of Works, Lord Tong, and the Minister of War, Lord Qin, fought in that House of Yunyan. Later, people said that it was a battle at the top of a brothel. You seem to have mentioned this before. The Empress nodded her head. She seemed to have recalled such a matter. Why is it called the decisive battle at the summit of the brothel? The Empress asked curiously. They say that House Yunyan is a brothel. It seems that many adults go there. I've heard about it a few times, Qing Yuan said. Why is it called a brothel? The Empress asked. Maybe it's green? Qing Yuan's eyes widened as she guessed. She had previously asked why it was called a brothel, but no one seemed to have told her. Your Majesty, why did you think of this? Qing Yuan felt that Her Majesty was a little strange tonight. Why did she suddenly think of this matter? In the past, when she told her about it, she was never interested. Oh. The Empress muttered to herself for a while and didn't say anything. However, he felt even more bored. Call Xange over, the Empress ordered. A moment later, Xange entered the palace. Your Majesty. The Empress stood up and walked out. Follow me out of the palace. There's no need to inform the others, we're just going out for a stroll. Yes. Xange hurriedly followed him. It was rare for Her Majesty to be in such a mood, so she naturally wouldn't stop him. No one could hurt His Majesty anyway. In the past few years, the number of times His Majesty left the palace could be counted on one hand. This was the first time he wanted to go out at night. Qing Yuan pouted at the back. How could His Majesty not bring her along? It had been a long time since he had left the palace. After leaving Yangxin Palace Hall, the Empress appeared on the roof in a flash. After a few transformations, she appeared outside the palace. Since they were out for a stroll, there was no need to walk through the palace gates. As for the other mounts, they weren't even as fast as her walking. Your Majesty, where are we going? Xanzha landed behind the Empress and asked. House Yunyan. Do you know the way? The Empress asked casually. She wanted to try out what it felt like to drink in a restaurant. Since so many officials of the imperial court liked to go to House Yunyan, it must be a good place. She could also listen to what they were saying. Xanzha was terrified after hearing what the Empress said. Your Majesty. We can't do it here. Qing Yuan and Hong Yuan did not know what kind of place that was, but with so many subordinates under her, how could they not know about House Yunyan? Even if no one mentioned it in front of her, she would occasionally hear about it. When the Empress saw Rinpoche's reaction, she turned to look at her and asked, Why? Is there anything I don't know? Your Majesty, House Yunyan is a place for men to seek pleasure. With your status, the consequences will be unimaginable if you go there. Furthermore, you will be disgraced. Seek pleasure? Not a restaurant? The Empress finally understood what was going on. Your Majesty. Xanzha did not know whether to laugh or cry. Which bastard told the Empress about that place? That's a place where women accompany men to drink and seek pleasure. It's really not suitable for your Majesty to go there. Why don't I accompany you somewhere else? If your Majesty wants to go to a restaurant, I know 2 good places to go, Xanzha consoled. The Empress was silent for a while before she chuckled. Xanzha felt the temperature around the Empress drop sharply. Even she could feel the chill. Hee, all the more reason to go and take a look. The Empress sneered. Your Majesty. Xanzha was shocked. If people knew that the Empress wanted to go there, the consequences would be unimaginable. Lead the way. The Empress said coldly. With the sweet potatoes made by Sir Ren, life in the mountain village will be much better in a few years. I thank you on behalf of everyone in the village. Sir Ren, why don't you consider going to the Department of Agriculture and Livestock? Guihong held a small jar and knocked it against Rinpoche's bowl. Then he raised his head and gulped down the wine. No, I'm not going. Rinpoche rejected him flatly. Then he gulped down another mouthful of wine. His eyes were already blurred. He had already drunk a lot of wine before Guihong. Even though the alcohol content wasn't high, he couldn't handle drinking like this. Just now, Tong Jingye pushed a gentlewoman to him, and he immediately pushed her away. If that old man set him up, wouldn't he die a miserable death? Sir Tong, enjoy it yourself. I'm not interested in women. I'm just here to drink. Rinpoche grinned, revealing his white teeth. Tong Jingye spat out the wine. He looked at Rinpoche and laughed. All right. However, when that delicate and charming woman called Ling Guan poured wine for Rinpoche, Rinpoche deliberately moved his stool a little further away, maintaining a distance of half a meter. It looked like Tong Jingye was hugging a woman in each hand. That woman called Ling Guan didn't mind Rinpoche's actions at all. She pursed her lips and smiled as she poured wine for him. She considerately helped Rinpoche fill up his wine cup. Every time she would specially get up to pour wine for him. Rinpoche always felt that this woman was definitely in cahoots with them. Tell me, what benefits did Sir Tong promise you to get me drunk with them? Rinpoche looked at her dizzily after drinking a few jars of wine. Sir, you must be joking. The wine was offered by all of you and you drank it yourself. I'm just refilling your wine with my bare hands. Don't tell me that you don't like it? Ling Guan smiled. When Rinpoche heard Ling Guan's words, such a person suddenly appeared in his mind. If that person could be like this. Rinpoche's heart quivered when he thought of the Empress refilling his wine with a gentle voice. That would most likely be the last wine. However, even though the Empress was cold, she was extremely charming when she was cold. Occasionally she would reveal her feminine side. That kind of contrast was very alluring. However, it was extremely rare. After such a long time he had only seen it a few times. When he thought of the Empress, Rinpoche's thoughts magnified under the influence of alcohol and he started to miss her very much. After all, even though he was always on tenterhooks in the beginning, after such a long time, the Empress's weight in his heart was extremely heavy and occupied more than half of it. At first, when he heard about the brothel, he was full of curiosity, but he was just fooling around. When he really sat here, he was thinking about the Empress. After drinking another 2 bowls of wine, Tong Jingye looked at his drowsy appearance and asked, Deputy Prefect Ren, why don't you come to the Ministry of Works? We are still lacking an assistant minister. Tang Jinye's and Gui Hong's methods were exactly the same. Feng Lai looked at him with a hidden bitterness. I'm not going. Ren Baqin flatly refused. If you come to the Ministry of Works, with your knowledge and experience, you will definitely be able to do something and change the opinion of the entire imperial court. Why do you need to do those miscellaneous things in Yufu? It's really a waste. Tang Jinye looked drunk but still tried his best to persuade Ren Baqin patiently. There were several reasons why he invited Ren Baqin to drink this time around. The so-called celebration was only a side effect. He wanted to see Ren Baqin's temperament, and he also wanted to pull Ren Baqin into the Ministry of Works. Tang Jinye's real intention was to pull Ren Baqin into the Ministry of Works. Even though Ren Baqin held a post in Yufu, as long as he talked to the Empress, there shouldn't be a problem for him to come to the Ministry of Works. He always felt that Ren Baqin had a lot of knowledge in his head and would be of great use to the Ministry of Works. Of course, he also had some other ideas. For example, he wanted to get something out of Ren Baqin's mouth to see how much knowledge he had. However, after 3 rounds of wine, Tang Jinye had long forgotten about this matter and only remembered to pull Ren Baqin into the Ministry of Works. Even so, I'm not going, Ren Baqin said in a drowsy manner. He couldn't hear what Tang Jinye was saying after that. His mind was spinning and his head fell on the table. Tang Jinye rambled on for a long time, but he still couldn't hear any movement from Ren Baqin. He only heard Feng Ho say in a drunken tone, Deputy Prefect Ren has collapsed just like that. You didn't play tricks while drinking, not bad. Tang Jinye looked at Ren Baqin and burped. Why have you collapsed? I haven't finished talking yet. If Deputy Prefect Ren goes back like this, I'm afraid Her Majesty will blame you. Tang Yen, who was relatively sober, said. Following which, he added, in any case, Minister Ren, you are the one who will bear the responsibility. What's there to be afraid of? Tang Jinye didn't seem to care at all. At worst, he could just say that he was helping Her Majesty to test Deputy Prefect Ren's temperament. Would Her Majesty still blame him? Is that so? A cold voice suddenly came from the window. 2 figures immediately entered the room. With a sweep of her eyes, the Empress could clearly see the situation in the room. Each of them had a lady by their side, and there were 2 ladies by Tang Jinye's side. Ren Baqin, on the other hand, was well behaved and kept his distance from the rest. His head had fallen on the table. She was slightly satisfied with the situation in the room. Your Majesty. Before Tang Jinye could finish his sentence, he broke through 3 walls in a row and flew out. The deafening sound alarmed everyone in the brothel. The Empress grabbed Ren Baqin's collar with one hand and disappeared out of the window in a flash. Before Xinjia left, she glared at everyone fiercely. This bunch of B***stards actually brought that person to the brothel? Were they courting death? Tang Yen looked at the big hole in the wall and the few ladies who were shocked. He calmly drank his wine and said, in any case, Minister Ren will bear the responsibility. Everyone was shocked when the Empress came in just now. After the Empress left, everyone looked at the wall and heard Tang Yan's words. Immediately, everyone burst into laughter. None of them could sit still. Gui Hong laughed so hard that he slammed his palm on the table, causing a huge piece of the stone table to fall off. Chapter 237. When Ren Baqin was blown by the night wind, he felt his stomach churn and vomit the moment he opened his mouth. Being carried by the Empress, he vomited along the way as if she was sowing seeds. The Empress looked at Ren Baqin, who she was carrying, with a look of disgust on her face. Even though the smell had been left behind along the way, it still made its way into her nose. Your Majesty, why don't I carry Deputy Prefect Ren? Xinjia said from behind. The Empress was carrying Deputy Prefect Ren from the front, and the smell of the Empress's clothes was going straight into her nose. Moreover, he had to be careful to avoid the unknown things that were coming towards him. The Empress looked at Ren Baqin, threw him to Xinjia, and landed on the street from the rooftop. With her hands behind her back, she walked forward unhurriedly. Lan City was very dark at night. Other than the lantern-carrying pedestrians and the light from the courtyards, there was only the light from the 2 moons. Xinjia imitated the Empress and held onto his back, making him lean forward. In their hands, Ren Baqin's weight was no different from that of a straw. Zixiao. Ren Baqin mumbled vaguely. The Empress stopped in her tracks and turned around. Rinpoche's eyes were tightly shut, and he didn't seem to be sober at all. He was still mumbling, Zixiao. Zixiao? Xenja was shocked. Rinpoche actually called Her Majesty by her name. His Majesty didn't seem angry at all. Instead, his expression was relaxed and calm, not cold. Zixiao, pour the wine, the Empress, Xenja. Xenja was shocked by Rinpoche's courage. The Empress furrowed her eyebrows and ignored him. She turned around and walked toward the palace. After returning to the center of the palace, she threw Rinpoche back to Pingle Park. The Empress took the wine pot and went up to the roof of Yangxin Palace Hall. She looked up at the moonlight and drank a mouthful of wine from time to time. Originally he was prepared to beat Rinpoche half to death and cripple Tang Xinye. However, when she saw that he kept his distance from the others and behaved himself, her anger disappeared without a trace, and her mood changed from bad to good. If Tang Xinye hadn't spouted nonsense, he might not have been beaten. What happened just now? In a room sat a man with one arm missing. His surname was Xing and his name was Xing Rong. He used to be a commandant of the Protectorate of the North, and now he was the person in charge of the 100 Flowers Courtyard. The Minister of Works, Lord Tong, is hosting a banquet at House Yunyan. Below him were 10 equally muscular men, but they were missing an eye, an ear, and only 2 fingers on their left hands. Xing Rong didn't say anything. His life of blood and fire gave people the feeling that he was like steel that had been tempered 100 times. He was silent, hard, and contained a powerful explosive force. Even though he was now a cripple, not many people would look down on him. Imperial Deputy Prefect Rinpoche has also been invited by Sir Tong, that man continued. Xing Rong thought for a while before he remembered who Imperial Deputy Prefect Rinpoche was. In fact, no one really took Rinpoche's position as Imperial Deputy Prefect seriously. Usually when people mentioned him they would refer to him as, that guy. When Xing Rong recalled who Rinpoche was he laughed. And then? His Majesty is here, the man said concisely. Lord Tong suffered a kick and smashed through 3 walls before falling into the Moon Pavilion. On the other hand, Deputy Prefect Ren was fine and was brought back. I wonder if anything will happen when I get back. Upon hearing this, Xing Rong burst into laughter. He laughed so hard that tears were about to come out of his eyes. After a while he stopped and asked, "How is Rinpoche?" "I couldn't tell. He looks quite well behaved. If he doesn't follow the rules, Your Majesty doesn't have to do anything. I will kill him with a slap," Xing Rong said casually. The Empress's prestige in Dayo was extremely high. The same went for Hong Wu in the Protectorate of the North and the people of Dayo. As Hong Wu's subordinate, he naturally revered the Empress. "Tell everyone who knows about this to shut up." Xing Rong waved his hand. Whether it was him or the people of the Ministry of Works, they all kept their mouths shut about this matter. However, the matter still spread, especially among the upper echelons of the court. Tang Xinye invited Imperial Deputy Prefect Rinpoche to drink wine at House Yunyan, but the Empress kicked him from House Yunyan to the Moon Pavilion. This was considered the most eye-catching case of an adulterer being caught in a brothel in Lan City, even though only a few people knew about it. Many people rejoiced in Tang Xinye's misfortune and were waiting to see how Tang Xinye would look the next day. For example, the Minister of War, Qin Chuan, was very happy to mock Tang Xinye. At the same time, he wanted to see if that Imperial Deputy Prefect had been beaten to death by His Majesty. Rinpoche slept all the way until dawn. When he woke up, he had a terrible headache and his stomach was churning again. Just as he was about to vomit, he realized that there was a small basin in front of him. Immediately he vomited for a long time. Then he took a bowl of sweetened water and drank it. Before he could feel better, his stomach churned again and he vomited out all the sweetened water that he had just drunk. After tossing and turning for a long time and vomiting whatever he drank, he finally fell into a deep sleep. When he woke up again, it was already noon. Not far away, a palace maid was dozing off. When she heard the sound of Rinpoche getting up, she quickly helped him up and poured him a cup of sweetened water. After Rinpoche drank the sweetened water, he felt slightly better and finally survived. He swore ferociously in his heart, "Damn it, I won't drink so much next time no matter what. It's really unbearable. If I drink so much again I will change my surname to Qi." He got up from his bed and went out to get some fresh air. As for what happened last night, he didn't know anything at all. He thought that Su Wei and the others sent him back. That palace maid left in a hurry. Not long after, she brought a bowl of porridge over and Rinpoche drank it clean. "Sir, someone is looking for you." He has been waiting since morning. When the Imperial Guards of Pingle Park saw that Ren Baqin had woken up, they had a strange expression on their faces. Others might not know about what happened last night, but they were very clear about it. No one would have thought that the Minister of Works, Sir Tong, would be sent flying with a kick from Her Majesty. Yet this Deputy Prefect Ren was actually unscathed. If Tong Xinye knew about this, there was an 80% chance that he would be resentful and say, "Your Majesty, you have changed. In the past we would both be punished 50 times. After hearing this, Ren Baqin recalled that he had asked Teng Hulu and Tai Dao to look for him yesterday. He instructed the Imperial Guards to bring the two of them into the palace while he sat on a stone bench in the courtyard. He covered his head with one hand and posed like a thinker. Only when he heard footsteps coming from the courtyard did Ren Baqin turn his head to take a look. To his surprise, it wasn't the two of them. It was the Empress, who was wearing a red muslin dress with a white undergarment inside. "Your Majesty." Ren Baqin quickly got up and greeted her. The Empress looked at him and said coldly, "I heard that you went to drink wine with prostitutes yesterday? Tell me, how do you drink wine with prostitutes? I have never tried it before." "Your Majesty, how would I know what kind of place that is? It was the Minister of Works, Tong Xinye, who invited me there. Before I went there yesterday, I even mentioned it to Your Majesty. I only found out what kind of place it was after I went there. I didn't expect Sir Tong, who looks so mature, to actually be so dissolute." Ren Baqin hurriedly cried injustice. Furthermore, he continued to smear Tong Xinye's name without the slightest hesitation. "I heard that you even called my name," the Empress said again. "I must have missed Your Majesty too much. There is a saying that a day apart feels like 3 years. The saying is indeed true. You still want me to pour you wine?" Chapter 238. In Yangxin Palace Hall, Ren Baqin and the Empress sat face to face. Between them was a table with a few dishes on it. "Drink with me. I'm going to pour it for you." After the Empress poured some wine for him, her eyes slightly curved, and the corners of her mouth curled up. Ren Baqin felt nauseous when he smelled the pungent smell of alcohol. This time it wasn't wine with more than 10% alcohol. Instead, it was erguatu that Ren Baqin brought over. "Your Majesty, I don't know anything." Ren Baqin scowled miserably. When did he ask the Empress to pour wine for him? Was that something he could say? Furthermore, how did the Empress hear about it? Could it be that you don't want to drink with me? The Empress's gaze was like the ripples on the surface of a calm lake that was being blown by the wind. Her tone was gentle, and there was even a long syllable at the end. If it was any other time, the Empress's attitude and tone would have made his heart itch. At this moment, it was as if he had eaten a yellow lotus. No matter how hard he racked his brain, he couldn't figure out what he had done wrong. The Empress held the wine glass with 3 fingers and looked at Ren Baqin's face. She found the bitter look on his face interesting, and the smile on her face became even more obvious. Ren Baqin clenched his teeth, raised his wine glass to indicate to the Empress, and downed it in one gulp. His stomach churned again, and it took him a lot of effort to suppress it. The Empress also poured the wine in her cup into her mouth with a smile. Then she poured another cup for Ren Baqin. Ren Baqin looked at the wine glass and thought about the wine that the Empress poured for him yesterday. He thought that it would definitely be the last wine he would get. He didn't expect to drink it today. After downing 3 cups in a row, Ren Baqin immediately covered his mouth for fear that he would spit it out. The Empress then said, "Forget it, I won't torture you anymore." Ren Baqin felt as if he had been pardoned. "Give Deputy Prefect Ren a bowl of green vine water." The Empress raised her head and said. Her voice traveled directly to the ears of Qing Yuan and Hong Yuan, who were standing at the entrance of Yangxin Palace Hall. A moment later, a bowl of green and transparent soup with a strange smell was placed in front of him. "Drink it, it will help you get over the hangover," the Empress said. "Thank you, Your Majesty." Ren Baqin drank the green vine water. It tasted very strange, as if there were many different things mixed in it. However, after drinking it, his body immediately warmed up, and the uncomfortable feeling lessened a lot. "Ah, I'm saved," Ren Baqin moaned. The Empress pursed her lips slightly, and there was a tinge of pride in her eyes. This was the first time the Empress had displayed such a childish expression on her face. "Your Majesty, what is this?" Ren Baqin asked curiously. This kind of hangover medicine would definitely sell well. He had drunk those anti-hangover drugs before, but the effects were very ordinary, especially after drinking. Compared to the green vine water, it was like heaven and earth. It's a type of green vine from the 60,000 mountains. You can use it after grinding it into powder and mixing it with water. However, ordinary people can't get drunk even if they want to. Naturally, no one uses this thing, the Empress said casually. Rinpoche immediately memorized this. As long as this thing was brought to Earth, it would probably be launched into the market very quickly. After all, the two drugs were still in development, and it would probably take a few years before they could produce results. Although he still had 20 million on him, which seemed like a lot, it wasn't really enough to do anything. He was also too embarrassed to go to the Empress's treasury to take things back to Earth to sell. Rinpoche stayed in Yangshin Palace Hall for a long time. After chatting with the Empress for a while, he got up and left. Although he was teased, he discovered something good. Rinpoche felt that the laboratory on Earth would soon be able to launch a product that could be launched into the market. After returning to his room, Rinpoche thought about whether he had forgotten anything. In the afternoon he met Teng Hulu and Tai Dao. When they saw the Empress, they didn't even dare to raise their heads. The Empress glanced at the two of them, didn't say anything, and left on her own. Before she left, she asked Rinpoche to come to Yangshin Palace Hall after he was done with his work. It was as if she came to see if Rinpoche had woken up. After that, Rinpoche explained some things to the two of them. In addition to the farmland, he also drew a rough outline of the sofa and asked them to find a carpenter to make it. He also asked a blacksmith to make things like springs. After which, he just needed to lay a cushion and cover it with processed leather. After thinking for a while, it seemed that he had forgotten nothing and disappeared from the room. Rinpoche appeared in the living room on Earth and realized that it was night time. Other than the light coming in from the window, it was pitch black. Just as he was about to sit on the sofa, Rinpoche's ears twitched slightly. There were sounds upstairs. Furthermore, it was the sound of someone walking and rummaging through things. Someone was there. A thief? Rinpoche immediately realized that his house had been invaded by a thief. He didn't know if it was the thief or him who was unlucky. He wasn't around most of the time, but he actually bumped into the thief the moment he came back. He always came back with the Empress, but when he came back alone he bumped into the thief. Rinpoche felt that both he and the thief were rather unlucky. What should he do? Call the police. He was afraid that the thief would notice if he made any noise now. Should he make some noise to scare the thief away? Rinpoche pondered that the important things upstairs wouldn't be taken away by the thief. For example, the contract he signed with Papa Chen would be useless even if it was taken away. But where would he put his face? In any case, he was a man who faced tens of thousands of soldiers and survived through a sea of blood. He had stayed in a world of martial arts for so long and had seen so many experts. How could he be afraid of a thief? Furthermore, his hands had the strength of 170 kilograms. Wasn't he more powerful than an average adult? Rinpoche made up his mind. He tiptoed to the kitchen and took a kitchen knife. Even though he might not need it, if the thief had a knife, he could rely on it to defend himself. Then he quietly made his way to the second floor. It was also pitch black, but there was some light in his room, similar to a flashlight. Rinpoche felt his way to the door of his room. His heart skipped a beat. Damn, there were two people. Ghost. The person in the room accidentally shone his flashlight at the door and saw a figure. He was scared out of his wits. Ghost my ass, the other person cursed and shone his flashlight at the door. At this moment, Rinpoche didn't have time to hide. He stood at the door with a gloomy look on his face and got a shock. Damn it, if I knew it was two people I wouldn't have flaunted myself. Feels like a tragedy. Rinpoche cursed in his heart. How was he going to clean up this mess? What are you looking for? Rinpoche said in a low voice and put on a gloomy look. The man in the room was shocked at first, then he became furious. He took out a knife from his waist and cursed, Motherf asterisk cur, don't play tricks on me. Brothers, we are in the same line. I didn't expect you to be one step ahead of me. Rinpoche laughed awkwardly. Hearing Rinpoche's words, the man became even more furious. Get lost or I will stab you to death. Chapter 239. At this time there was a white cloth on the bed. There were some things piled up on it, but it was hard to see what was inside. Rinpoche thought about it and realized that there was nothing worth stealing from him. There was probably more than 1,000 yuan in his wallet. It didn't matter if he let them take it. As for those cards, they shouldn't be able to guess the password. He could just get another one tomorrow. At this moment he suddenly remembered something. There seemed to be a few jade pendants. Although they were not worth much, they were worth 2 million yuan in total. However, he did not sell them because they were not enough. But it didn't matter. It didn't matter if the jade pendant worth 2 million yuan was gone. Moreover, if the jade pendant worth 2 million yuan was lost, the police should be able to catch the culprit. Rinpoche remembered that there were some photos of the Empress in the phone. He had to get the phone back. Rinpoche thought about it and felt that such a small request shouldn't be too difficult, right? They couldn't sell the phones for much money. The man thought for a moment. What if this person really went out and called the police? He could not help but ask, "What do you want?" "We'll split it in half when we meet," Rinpoche said. Of course he couldn't just ask for the phone. It would be too obvious. The two looked at each other and nodded. All right. Rinpoche reached out to turn on the lights and the two of them immediately shouted, "Don't turn on the lights." "It's fine. I've been watching this place for a long time, and there are very few people here," Rinpoche replied nonchalantly. Of course, the two people that Rinpoche mentioned knew about this. Otherwise they wouldn't have appeared here. "The items are here. We'll take these items. You can choose the rest." One of them directly grabbed a few pieces of jade pendants. Although the two of them did not know much about these things, they were often very valuable. Rinpoche scanned through the contents and knew that they were all things that weren't very important to him. Contracts and whatnot were tossed aside by them. "Generally there isn't much cash in a wallet, but I still choose a wallet." Rinpoche stood at the door and didn't move. The two people inside were holding knives in their hands. Getting his wallet would save him the trouble of getting a new card and ID. The burly man threw the wallet at Rinpoche's feet. "Those are jade pendants, right? Should be something good. Since that's the case, I'll earn some money." "I want the phone too," Rinpoche continued. The phone slid across the floor to his feet. Rinpoche heaved a sigh of relief. Everything else didn't matter. He's the landlord. His photo is on the table. Just as Rinpoche was about to relax, another person in the room suddenly shouted in surprise. Rinpoche cursed in his heart. Suddenly he recalled that he did have a photo with the Empress. It was taken in Turkey and he had developed it and placed it on the table. If he had known earlier he wouldn't have turned on the lights. Hearing this, the big man's eyes flashed fiercely. "Brat, you're courting death. You're just stealing. You don't want to become murderers, right? If you're caught stealing you'll be sentenced to 2 or 3 years at most, but murder is the death penalty," Rinpoche calmly explained. When the two of them heard this they were stunned. Their footsteps, which were about to rush over, also stopped. This was the first time they had encountered something like this. This guy was too calm. If it wasn't for the fact that this guy was holding a kitchen knife in his hand, he would have thought that he had met a tough opponent. However, Rinpoche's calmness and words were still the same. The two of them secretly praised him for being a character. At first he pretended to be in the same trade, but now he could say such words. Rinpoche's calmness was infectious. "You're right." The burly man nodded. "We're after money, not our lives." "That's right. My wallet and phone are of some use to me. The rest doesn't matter." Rinpoche smiled. "You look like a character. This time we've offended you. We won't take anything else and we'll leave now," the burly man said again. Rinpoche paid attention to the two of them as he bent over to pick up the phone. At the same time he said, "Since this is the case, I won't call the police." At this moment, the burly man's eyes suddenly flashed fiercely. He rushed toward Rinpoche with the dagger in his hand. F***ck. Rinpoche was shocked by this sudden turn of events. Didn't they already have a deal? However, his movements weren't slow. He quickly dodged to the side. After going through so many things, even though he was still a weak chicken and hadn't improved much in this aspect, he wouldn't panic when he encountered danger. Instead, he calmly dodged the other party's dagger. Why? Rinpoche was puzzled. Why did the other party change his mind again? A dead man won't call the police. The burly man gritted his teeth and slashed the dagger in his hand toward Rinpoche again. Rinpoche's head was filled with question marks. No matter what, it wasn't worthwhile to kill someone, right? There shouldn't be any problem with his words unless the other party wanted to kill him from the start. Otherwise it wouldn't make sense. However, he couldn't figure out what exactly was going on. However, he didn't have time to think. He narrowly dodged the dagger and slashed at the other party's hand with the back of his hand. Rinpoche's ferocious nature was aroused. After all, he had killed people before. At this moment he couldn't be like a lamb. Rinpoche's kitchen knife happened to slash at the other party. It was fast and ruthless. The burly man couldn't stop in time and was directly chopped off by Rinpoche. He immediately cried out in pain and covered his arm. Fuzi. The other person rushed out of the room and was shocked to see this scene. He took out a dagger and stabbed at Ren Baqin. Ren Baqin barely dodged, but his ribs were cut. The pain was transmitted directly to his brain, causing him to groan. That person stabbed at Ren Baqin's neck again. At the same time, the burly man called Fuzi endured the pain and used his left hand to pick up the dagger. When Ren Baqin saw that he was about to be attacked by two people, he quickly shouted, "Help!" and turned to run. When the other party heard Ren Baqin's shout, he became anxious and chased Ren Baqin downstairs with his knife. It was pitch black downstairs. His eyes couldn't adapt to the darkness and he almost couldn't see anything. At this moment, Ren Baqin suddenly stopped in his tracks and swung his kitchen knife at the man's neck. Blood immediately spurted out like a fountain. That person went limp without making a sound. Ren Baqin's palms were also sweating. It wasn't because he had killed someone but because it was too scary to fight with a real knife and gun. His heart was about to jump out of his chest. At this moment, Fuzi, who had a broken arm, ran down from upstairs. When he saw the other person lying on the ground, he immediately turned around and ran back. Ren Baqin heaved a sigh of relief and slowly followed him up the stairs. He thought to himself that this was considered legitimate self-defense. It should be fine to call the police, right? He wasn't afraid of anything else, but he was afraid that he would be detained for a few days. If that happened, he would be in big trouble. If he disappeared from the detention center, he wouldn't be able to explain himself. That burly man pointed the knife in Ren Baqin's direction. His whole body was trembling and his face was covered in sweat. It was unknown whether it was because of pain or fear. Originally he was prepared to kill Ren Baqin, but he didn't expect Ren Baqin to kill him. At the same time, blood was spurting out of his wrist. "If you don't go to the hospital, you will probably bleed to death," Ren Baqin kindly reminded him. That person being hacked to death by Ren Baqin should be considered legitimate self-defense. If this person were to bleed to death, it wouldn't be easy to determine. Ren Baqin was afraid that there would be trouble. That burly man stared at him fiercely and rushed over to stab him again. However, he only had one hand and it wasn't his right hand that he was used to. How could he be a match for Ren Baqin? Ren Baqin's knife slashed at his chest and he immediately fell to the ground. However, he was still breathing and didn't die. It was just that he bled a little too much and his ribs might have been fractured. Ren Baqin then relaxed, picked up the phone and called the police. "I have two people who broke into my house to steal and tried to silence me with a knife. I accidentally hacked one of them to death and the other one is half dead." Ren Baqin reported his address to the police, following which he called Qin Qing. Qin Qing sleepily picked up the phone. "Big brother, what time is it now?" "I killed someone." Ren Baqin's words immediately woke Qin Qing up. He quickly asked, "What's the situation? Where is it? Does anyone know?" Upon hearing Qin Qing's words, Ren Baqin felt warmth in his heart. After all, they were friends. Qin Qing's first reaction wasn't to call the police to arrest him. Instead, it sounded like Qin Qing wanted to help him deal with the aftermath. "There were two burglars at my house. They broke into my house to steal and tried to kill me with a knife. During the fight, I hacked one of them to death and the other one was seriously injured," Ren Baqin said unhurriedly. "How are you?" Ren Baqin heard Qin Qing's relieved voice coming from the other end of the phone. "My palms are all sweaty and I was scared to death," Ren Baqin sighed. "You aren't injured?" Qin Qing was astonished. Based on what he knew, Ren Baqin had never even fought before. Yet, he single-handedly killed two people who used knives to commit murder? "You can't wait for me to get injured, right?" Ren Baqin said unhappily. "I will call the police. Hurry up and get me out." "Don't worry, it will be fine. I will be there very soon," Qin Qing consoled him and hung up the phone. Ren Baqin leaned against the wall and sat down. When he was talking to Qin Qing on the phone, his tone was still considered calm. However, his heart felt like it was about to jump out of his chest. Fighting hand-to-hand with a knife. It was too thrilling. It was too exciting. Ren Baqin's adrenaline was surging. He was excited and scared at the same time. The police moved very quickly. In 6 to 7 minutes, they arrived at the neighborhood and went upstairs to knock on the door. Only then did Ren Baqin go downstairs to open the door. He almost slipped on the blood on the floor. When the police came in, they saw a person lying on the floor of the staircase. His body was covered in blood. "There is another one upstairs," Ren Baqin pointed upstairs. Two police officers stood on his left and right and restrained him to interrogate him about the situation. The other two officers went upstairs to investigate the scene. Ren Baqin briefly explained the situation, including the conversation between him and the two men. With an innocent face and lingering fear, he pointed at the person lying on the floor and said, "He still has a few pieces of my jade pendants in his pocket. If they took my things, I would have tolerated it. But who would have thought that they would take my things and try to silence me? I was scared to death." The two police officers used a recording pen to record the situation. The ambulance had also arrived downstairs and sent the two men away. Ren Baqin then followed them to the police station. Just as he entered the police station, the identities of the two men were investigated. They were the murderers of the massacre in a certain city and had fled to this area. Now it was clear why the two men wanted to kill Ren Baqin to silence him. As long as Ren Baqin called the police and revealed their appearance, they would immediately be arrested by the entire city. Therefore they might as well go all out and kill Ren Baqin to silence him. They did not expect to meet a tough nut to crack this time. 10 minutes later, Qin Qing also arrived at the police station. After asking about the situation, he patted Ren Baqin's shoulder and gave him a thumbs up. An ordinary person would have panicked in such a situation. It was not easy to escape, let alone counterattack. After giving his statement at the police station and waiting for the report, Ren Baqin and Qin Qing finally walked out of the police station in the wee hours of the morning. In fact, the police officers had already judged the situation at the crime scene. For the next few hours, Ren Baqin directly lay on the table in the interrogation room and slept. As an ordinary person, he was actually able to sleep after encountering such a situation. This made many of the police officers who saw this extremely impressed. "I'm hungry, shall we go for breakfast?" Ren Baqin turned his head and asked Qin Qing after leaving the police station. Qin Qing looked at him with a weird expression and said, "Most people are not used to killing people, especially in such a bloody and thrilling scene. You slept and ate. Those who don't know would think that you are a repeat offender. I can't possibly skip meals and sleep just because of this, right? Don't forget that this matter is not over yet. Don't leave searching for the time being and wait for the verdict. Logically speaking, you should still be inside," Qin Qing said. Although the matter was almost settled, otherwise even if he used some connections, Ren Baqin would not be released so quickly. Chapter 240. His surroundings were dark blue, and the only light coming from above prevented the surroundings from falling into complete darkness. The omnipresent water pressure pressed down on Ren Baqin's muscles and bones, but Ren Baqin was trying his best to go down. All thoughts were thrown out of his mind and there was only one thought in his mind: go down. After an unknown period of time, he suddenly woke up when he lost all his strength. Phew! Ren Baqin gasped for breath. Just now, it was as if all the air in his chest had been squeezed out. After a while, Ren Baqin clenched his fists. They were soft and powerless, but his eyes were shining. Today he actually dived 1 meter more. One had to know that after practicing Rui visualization for so long, he could only dive half an inch more every day after taking a medicinal bath. Every 7 days he could only dive 1 meter more. 7 days was the period in which he absorbed all the medicinal effects of a medicinal bath. However, today he dived 1 meter more than the day before yesterday. Why did such a change happen? Ren Baqin was deep in thought. There were no other changes these days. He didn't practice yesterday, but today he dived 1 meter more, which was equivalent to absorbing the effects of a medicinal bath. The only thing that happened in the past 2 days was that he killed one person and seriously injured another last night. As for killing and seriously injuring people, he couldn't think of any relationship between his progress and cultivation. In that case, was there any change in his body during that soul-stirring counterattack? Ren Baqin felt that the possibility of unlocking one's potential during a life-and-death battle was the highest. No expert could become the world's #1 by hiding under a cliff and practicing hard for 30 years. Usually, such people would jump out and shout, "I'm already the world's #1, and then be smacked to death by a shoe that came flying out of nowhere. Life-and-death battles not only allowed people to master various skills, reactions, judgment, and the experience of encountering danger, but also caused some changes in the human body. Ren Baqin felt that this wasn't difficult to understand. This was because the human body had always had a lot of secrets. When encountering danger, some people could even unleash a strength that was several times stronger than usual. This was the potential of the human body. This should have happened to him this time, right? On one hand, it was a life-and-death battle, and on top of that, it was the martial arts that he practiced. Should he go back and try it out? Let the guards practice with him? Ren Baqin thought about it and felt that this idea wasn't very reliable. Firstly, sparring was different from a real life-and-death battle. Secondly, he reckoned that he wouldn't even be able to defeat the guard with one hand. Finding himself a 10-year-old kid was more like it. No matter what, it was better to go back and give it a try. There was no harm. If he really had to go through life and death battles to train, then it was better for him to continue slowly taking medicinal baths. If he went looking for stimulation when he had nothing to do, he might really die. His mind was filled with thoughts and he grew more and more tired. He didn't know when he would fall asleep. Rinpoche didn't know how long he had slept. He was awakened by hunger. His stomach was like a drum, and the feeling of hunger was really unbearable. When he got out of bed, he looked out the window and saw that the sky was still dark. He looked at his phone and realized that he had only slept for 3 hours. However, his stomach was already rebelling. Other than eating, Rinpoche had no other thoughts. When he arrived downstairs, the bloodstains on the ground had been cleaned up, and the smell of blood had long disappeared. As for the fact that someone had just died, which was unlucky for others, he did not care at all. After eating a bowl of instant noodles, Rinpoche touched his stomach and felt that he had come back to life. Then he felt a strong sense of hunger again. He ate 3 bowls of instant noodles in a row, but his hunger was still not gone. He cooked 5 packets of frozen dumplings and ate them before he felt a little better. Damn it, I'm finally alive. Rinpoche touched his stomach and groaned. Could this be the change caused by the increase in strength? Does the body need a lot of energy? Rinpoche pondered. Just like the Empress, if she relied on eating to replenish her energy, the amount of food she ate would make an ordinary person's eyeballs pop out. It was the same for him this time. In the past, he had to absorb medicinal baths to increase his strength. This time he completely relied on food. It was no wonder that he felt so hungry. He went to the living room and picked up the tension machine that he had used before. He casually tested it. It was easier than the previous time, which meant that his strength had increased. Every time he absorbed all the medicinal effects of the medicinal bath, he could dive 1 meter deeper and increase his strength by 15 kilograms. It was very likely that it would be the same this time. Before the first medicinal bath, his hands should be able to lift objects that weighed 130 kilograms. Now he could lift objects that weighed 190 kilograms? Even though it might not be comparable to an ordinary worker, this kind of improvement was enough to make him happy. Rinpoche went back to bed and slept. The next day he went to buy the solar crystal panel and battery that he had his eyes on previously. This solar crystal panel could store 3.6 kilowatts of electricity. He only needed 2 sets to maintain the lights in Jianghu Palace Hall. If he bought 2 more sets, he might even be able to get the Empress a television or a game console. Following which he bought 2 Chinese-style floor lamps. The style was similar to the palace lamps in the past. There was a wind on the top and a paper lantern hung below. There were even flowers and birds painted on the lantern. The light bulb inside was 20 watts. The battery could last for 90 hours, which was sufficient. Next time he would buy a battery as well as a spare one. 2 days later, Rinpoche brought the 2 floor lamps and a battery back to Pingle Park. The battery, the solar crystal panel, and the inverter weighed 70 kilograms. The 2 floor lamps added up to 17 kilograms. There were still 8 kilograms of empty space. Rinpoche brought some candies, popcorn, and hot pot base ingredients. It was morning when he returned to Pingle Park. Rinpoche first soaked in a medicinal bath. Following which, he used the walkie-talkie to call the Empress. A moment later, the walkie-talkie was connected. Before Rinpoche could say anything, he heard a clamor coming from the other end of the walkie-talkie. Tong Jinye, you old man. Today I will let you have a taste of the sharpness of my saber. Sir Qin, I will fight you with only one hand. Tong Jinye's voice came from the other end of the walkie-talkie. Wah, I am so angry. Today I will definitely chop you up. Following which, there was a clamor. Some were jeering and some were jeering. Rinpoche actually didn't hear anyone trying to stop the fight. Rinpoche was speechless. This was the imperial court of Dayo? It was indeed filled with the style of the aboriginals. Qin Chuan was the minister of war, right? The blood of the minister of war and the minister of works was spilled every 5 steps in the imperial court. If this happened in modern times, it would be on the headlines for half a month. Just as Rinpoche was listening attentively, the Empress switched off the walkie-talkie. This made Rinpoche feel very regretful. Only until noon did someone come to Pingle Park to look for Rinpoche. Deputy Prefect Rin, Her Majesty summons you to Jianghu Palace Hall to accompany her for lunch. Rinpoche asked the imperial guards to help carry the box all the way to Jianghu Palace Hall. The Empress was sitting on the couch with her hands on her head. He wasn't sure if she was having a headache because of the matters in the imperial court. Seeing the box being lifted, the Empress raised her head and asked curiously, "What's this?" "Floor lamp. Her Majesty doesn't have to suffer from the smoke of the oil lamp anymore." Ren Baqin laughed. After lunch, Ren Baqin bustled back and forth to unpack the box. 2 floor lamps were placed on both sides of the Empress's wooden couch. The style of the ancient palace lamps was just right for this palace hall. Ren Baqin placed the battery behind the wooden couch. Then he plugged in the table lamp and switched on the power cord. The floor lamp immediately lit up. A warm yellow light shone through the lampshade. It wasn't glaring and was just nice to illuminate the surroundings of the wooden couch. Qing Yuan and Hong Yuan's small mouths formed an O shape. Previously they saw Ren Baqin taking out a bunch of boxes, wires and other things, but they didn't see him adding oil to the lamp wick. How did the lamp light up? The Empress felt the light coming from both sides of the lamp and nodded her head slightly. This kind of brightness was very comfortable in the palace hall. It was slightly brighter than the oil lamp and it wouldn't flicker. Most importantly, she didn't have to suffer from the smoke anymore. Just as Ren Baqin was looking at the floor lamp with a satisfied look on his face and felt that he had done a great thing by spreading the light to the other world, the Empress suddenly asked, "Did you bring the arrow that you promised me? Did you bring it?" Chapter 241. Did you bring the arrow that you promised me? The Empress's voice drifted into Ren Baqin's ears. Ren Baqin was immediately petrified. I actually forgot about it. Furthermore, the Empress actually remembered. Ren Baqin was at a loss and looked like a bitter gourd. When the Empress saw Ren Baqin's expression, she immediately understood and said faintly, "The crime of deceiving the monarch." Ren Baqin almost spat out a mouthful of blood. "Your Majesty, I have been busy preparing the floor lamp and the battery," Ren Baqin hurriedly said. The crime of deceiving the monarch. Ren Baqin wanted to cry but had no tears. He felt that those people who filmed the Qing dynasty should be strangled to death. If it wasn't for them, how would the Empress have learned this sentence? "This time when I went, I encountered a huge change." Ren Baqin immediately changed his story. Oh. The Empress was slightly curious when she heard this. At least, Ren Baqin seemed to be fine now, which meant that there were no major problems. "The 2 of you can leave." The Empress saw Ren Baqin's gaze and waved her hand at Hong Yuan and Qing Yuan. Qing Yuan looked unhappy. She still wanted to hear what exactly happened to Deputy Ren. At the same time, she was also curious about where he had gone. These days, the 2 of them kept discovering strange things in the palace. For example, this lamp that could light up without adding oil or burning, and the box that could speak in the Empress's hand. This caused the 2 of them to have all kinds of speculations. Unfortunately, the Empress didn't allow them to listen at this moment. "Speak," the Empress said after the 2 of them left. "Your Majesty, you may not know this, but this time when I just returned, I heard someone making a noise upstairs. I immediately tensed up and thought that an accident had happened. At this moment, the culprit directly stabbed me with a dagger. Your Majesty knows about my situation and was stunned at that time. I barely dodged the attack. However, the other party wasn't just 1 person, but 2. Ren Baqin spoke for more than 10 minutes. He had the voice and appearance to describe his encounter with a thief and counterattack like a Hollywood blockbuster. It was thrilling and full of ups and downs. If one listened to his story, they would definitely think that he encountered Marines and not 2 thieves. For this reason, he specially showed the wound on his ribs to the Empress. In the end, I stayed in the police station for 3 days before I was released. During these 3 days, I thought about your Majesty day and night. After I left the police station, I immediately went to retrieve this battery and the floor lamp before rushing back to see your Majesty. My empty heart was finally at ease and I finally found a place to belong." Ren Baqin finally spouted nonsense with a straight face. The Empress looked at him and shook her head. "Forget it, I'll let you off this time." Ren Baqin heaved a sigh of relief. "It's not that I don't want to, but there have been too many twists and turns. I am physically and mentally exhausted after staying at the police station for a few days, and I miss your Majesty, so I decided to postpone this matter." "I can't tell that you are physically and mentally exhausted, but your face is indeed glowing," the Empress said casually with a smile in her eyes. She didn't know how much of what Ren Baqin said was true, but it was true that something had happened. In fact, most of the time, women didn't care whether what you said was true or not. As long as she felt that what you said was true and she was willing to believe it, it was fine. Even though the Empress felt that what Rinpoche said was a little exaggerated, but seeing that Rinpoche was really injured, she didn't really care. Instead, she thought of another matter. Your skills are indeed too weak. When you encounter danger, you don't even have the ability to protect yourself. From tomorrow onwards, I will get someone to teach you martial arts. You must not slack off. Otherwise, if you are killed, even if I can avenge you, you won't be able to come back to life. The previous time was an example, and it will be the same this time, the Empress continued. There was a trace of concern in her voice. It was very soft, but it could be felt. Thank you very much, Your Majesty, Rinpoche said softly. He also knew that what the Empress said was right. In such a world, no one knew when and what kind of things would happen. In particular, the difference in the level of martial arts between him and others was too big. The corresponding danger was also greatly increased. If he really encountered something like the previous time, he could only resign himself to fate. I will do my best, Rinpoche added. The Empress didn't care about his determination at all. I will be watching you. Rinpoche. That afternoon the Empress sat on a chair. Beside her was a small table with fruits, sweets, popcorn and wine. Behind her was a huge imperial canopy that blocked the sunlight like a parasol. Beside her were Qing Yuan and Hong Luan. One of them was massaging her shoulders while the other was fanning her. Rinpoche turned his head to look at the Empress, then looked at the bodyguard in front of him whose build was similar to Schwarzenegger's. He was dumbfounded. Didn't she say that she would teach him? Why did she go straight to the arena? It's faster to learn by sparring directly. This was what the Empress said just now. But now was it a matter of sparring? Wasn't he about to be beaten up by the other party? Let's begin. Why are you dilly-dallying? The Empress ate popcorn, a grape and a mouthful of wine. It fully illustrated what it meant to be an onlooker. Deputy Prefect Ren, I will be gentler. That bodyguard tried to hold back his laughter. Rinpoche really wanted to spit on his face. Your Majesty, I feel that it's better for me to learn some moves first. Rinpoche couldn't help but turn his head and say. It's all right, you will learn after a fight, the Empress casually replied. Rinpoche looked at the muscular bodyguard in front of him helplessly. He made up his mind, shouted loudly and dashed over. His imposing manner was overbearing like a mad dog. Then he flew back at a speed faster than when he dashed over. There was a huge footprint on his chest. Rinpoche clutched his chest as he lay on the ground and looked up at the sky. He muttered to himself, Oh life. Don't be lazy, I'm watching. The Empress was all smiles as she ate popcorn and drank erguoto. More than 2 hours had passed. Rinpoche was lying on the ground. His whole body was covered in dust. Other than his face, which was still fine, there wasn't a single part of his body that was fine. Your Majesty, I really can't do it. I feel like I'm seriously injured. Rinpoche's voice was full of grief, like a cuckoo crying blood. Oh, in that case, I will teach you a set of boxing techniques tomorrow. You can try again, the Empress said. Rinpoche lay on the ground and refused to get up no matter what. If the Empress had said this earlier, he wouldn't have had to suffer this beating. At this moment, the sun had already set. Rinpoche looked at the setting sun and thought about how he used to run under the setting sun, as well as the youth that had finally passed away. You are too crafty and very lazy. If it was someone else who had this opportunity, they wouldn't hesitate to train hard every day, but you didn't even think about it. If you don't suffer a little, you will definitely be lazy. In the future, you will handle your work in the morning, practice your boxing techniques in the afternoon, and practice sparring on the other days, the Empress said sternly. After hearing these words, Rinpoche knew that his good days were completely over. Chapter 242. How can this thing emit light? There's actually no smoke at all. Shi Qin, Ko Zhihai, Tong Jinye, Qin Xuan, Tu Wan, and a few other big shots surrounded the 2 floor lamps in Yangxin Palace Hall and exclaimed in admiration. The Empress stood in front of a mirror not far away and ignored the people behind her. This thing stores sunlight before releasing it. Therefore, it doesn't require lamp oil or smoke, Rinpoche said nonsense to the group of country bumpkins. It's indeed a treasure. Everyone nodded after hearing this. Deputy Prefect Rin, do you still have this treasure? Tong Jinye asked. Of course not. In fact, it wasn't a big problem to give each of these big shots a solar battery, but Rinpoche didn't have any intention of giving them something that was ahead of the times. The Empress had some understanding of Earth, but in the eyes of these people this thing was more magical. It wouldn't be a good thing if it was everywhere. Things like walkie-talkies were too useful. There was no need for solar batteries and lamps as they were meaningless. The group of people surrounded the floor lamps and exclaimed in admiration for a long time, fully satisfying the Empress's desire to show off. Rinpoche felt that she invited so many people to have a meal in the palace just to show off this new toy. Although there weren't many of these things on Earth, they were still very magical in this world. Previously, so many people were doubtful about her choice of a husband. At this moment she was able to use the electric lamps on Earth to scare those big shots. This made her feel much better. During lunch, everyone was full of praise for the food in the palace. The two shameless old men, Tong Jinya and Qin Chuan, immediately licked the plates. Everyone was also very tempted by the spices that Rinpoche took out. Although there were some spices planted in the beast park, it would take some time for them to mature. Furthermore, the amount was not enough to make anything. They could only hope that Rinpoche would quickly add more spices. After lunch, Tong Jinya pulled Rinpoche to one side and said, "I heard that Deputy Prefect Ren wants to buy land? I have a few hundred acres of land and can transfer some to you. What do you think, Deputy Prefect Ren?" "Sir Tong, it's not me who wants to buy land, it's Her Majesty who wants to buy land." Rinpoche immediately corrected Tong Jinya. However, Tong Jinya's ears were really sharp. Teng Hulu and Tai Dao had only been out for 2 days and he already knew about it. In fact, Rinpoche had forgotten about one thing. That day at the Beast Park, he mentioned that he was going to look for some land to plant spices. "It's all the same," Tong Jinya replied indifferently. The imperial family had not bought any land for many years. Everyone knew whose idea it was to suddenly buy land. "How many mu of land can Sir Tong transfer? What do you want?" Rinpoche asked. He didn't believe that Tong Jinya was inspired by Her Majesty and immediately sold a portion of his family's land to the Empress after knowing that she wanted to buy land. 50 mu. Spices, at least 10 mu of spices. "I won't take them for free, just sell them to me," Tong Jinya immediately said. Rinpoche felt that this amount was pretty good. 50 mu of land wasn't a small amount. This morning, Teng Hulu came to the palace and said that the fields around Lan City were distributed to the soldiers who had rendered meritorious service when the country was founded. Although the annual harvest was not much, not many people were willing to sell. Although they could buy spices, they were scattered all over the place and were far from Rinpoche's requirements. "I can only sell them to you for 3 years, Rinpoche added. "What if I transfer 100 mu of land to you?" Tong Jinya thought for a while and asked. "I will sell 20 mu of spices to you for 5 years. There is no need for more than that. By then the production of spices should be very large and you should be able to buy them easily," Rinpoche said. In fact, if they were to plant their own spices they might not even need 5 years. However, they couldn't possibly plant the spices the moment the Empress planted them, right? Wouldn't that be snatching food from the mouth of the imperial family? Rinpoche felt that 5 years was more or less enough. Tong Jinya thought for a while and nodded his head in agreement. Other than the spices for his own use, the rest of the spices could be sold to Great Xia and the Yin nation. He should be able to earn quite a lot. Tong Jinya was a businessman who was held back by the Ministry of Works. Although there were not many business-minded people in Dayo, there were still some. Especially people like Tong Jinya. "I will take my leave first." Tong Jinya looked at Tu Wan and nodded his head at Rinpoche. Tu Wan and Tong Jinya had the same goal, so Rinpoche gave Tong Jinya the same exchange plan. It had to be said that the officials in Dayo didn't have much land in their hands. Rank 3 officials like Tong Jinya and Tu Wan, who were already at the top, actually had a few hundred to 1,000 mu of land in their hands. If Rinpoche didn't hear it with his own ears, he wouldn't dare to believe it. Even on the surface it was still too little. Furthermore, what the two of them said might be true. The Aboriginals actually didn't care much about land because these lands were distributed to the meritorious soldiers in the past. It was more of a kind of glory for them to keep the land near Lan City. In the afternoon, the Empress and Rinpoche stood at the martial arts arena in the palace. This was the first time Rinpoche knew that there was such a place in the palace. There were many stone locks, stone balls and other things in the surroundings. "Watch my moves." The Empress was still wearing her red muslin dress. After she finished speaking, she stood there and practiced a set of boxing techniques. When she started her first move, Rinpoche's mind immediately shifted away from the Empress's figure. Austere. This was Rinpoche's first feeling. As soon as the Empress started her moves, Rinpoche felt a murderous aura around him, as if he was on a battlefield. Mighty. The Empress's moves weren't fast or complicated, but every punch made an explosive sound in the air, as if the air had exploded. More importantly, the Empress's slow punches actually had the imposing manner of a magnificent army, making people unable to stand in front of her and subconsciously retreat. Boom. As the Empress slapped the air, 6 or 7 1-meter square slabs in front of her exploded. Your Majesty's martial arts are unparalleled and unparalleled. Invincible in the East, I am the only one. Rinpoche woke up from the feeling of being on a battlefield and immediately shouted. Umph. The Empress's tone was a little higher and seemed to be a little mischievous. Following which, her voice became cold again and asked, "Did you see it clearly?" Rinpoche was speechless. Your Majesty, I only care about using my eyes to pursue your heroic appearance. Rinpoche laughed dryly. The Empress raised her eyebrows and stared intently at Rinpoche. I personally went down to demonstrate for you, yet you were actually distracted? Just now, I saw a murderous aura around me as if I was on a battlefield. Your Majesty, you were invincible in the midst of a magnificent army, but I was too slow to see this move, Rinpoche quickly said. Chapter 243. Rinpoche's upper body was exposed as he stood in the middle of the arena. Over the past few months he had grown quite a bit of muscle. At the very least, his original ribs were nowhere to be seen. At this moment, his eyes were filled with determination as he stared at his opponent. Even if Qin Qing was beside him, he wouldn't be able to recognize this sharp-eyed, sword-like, ruthless man. He was actually his friend who many people thought was ordinary and unremarkable. The laptop behind him was connected to the sound system and was playing the song, Into the Battlefield. It was a hot-blooded high school soundtrack. When he watched this movie, this music simply made his blood boil. At this moment, the strong rhythm and dense drumming made Rinpoche's adrenaline surge and his fighting spirit surge. He felt that if he had a gun he would be able to carry it onto the battlefield. At this moment, Rinpoche's opponent's attention was obviously attracted by the thing that was making the sound not far behind him. His gaze wandered and was fixated on the sound system. Chance. Rinpoche's eyes lit up. He stomped on the ground and dashed toward his opponent like a wild dog released from its leash. Bang! Then he flew back at a faster speed and landed heavily on the ground with a 46-yard large footprint on his chest. Ouch! Rinpoche groaned as he lay on the ground. Your Majesty, I need to change my opponent. You can choose from the Imperial Guards. The Empress, who was eating popcorn not far away, said generously. Can I lower the age of the Imperial Guard? I haven't even reached the man-wheel level. Rinpoche cried. Oh. Rinpoche's current Imperial Guard was about 30 years old. For the Aboriginals he hadn't reached the peak yet. Furthermore, the Imperial Guards weren't the most skilled. At the same level, the winged cavalry was slightly stronger than the Imperial Guards. I feel that I can give it a try with an opponent around 10 years old. Rinpoche seriously stated his request. The Empress almost laughed at Rinpoche's shameless behavior. Qing Yuan and Hong Wan looked at him with disdain. Could he be any more shameless? Meanwhile, Rinpoche's opponent was looking at the sky at a 45-degree angle. He didn't even use 5% of his strength just now. What else did he want? Isn't this a form of sparring? With my current strength, I'm still no match for him even if his hands and feet are tied up. Rinpoche got up from the ground and pleaded earnestly. The Empress squinted at him for a long time and finally said, "Okay." Rinpoche was overjoyed when he heard this. Your Majesty, you are accomplished in both literature and martial arts. You are benevolent to the common people and are willing to deliver all living things from suffering. Let's continue today. I will change your opponent for the sparring session the day after tomorrow, the Empress said. Alas. Rinpoche sighed and struck a pose. Then he stepped to the rhythm of a song by Nightwish and charged toward his opponent like a wild dog that had escaped its leash. Bang! This was the 7th day since the Empress started teaching him the fist technique. These 7 days could be said to be filled with tears and snot. Just the 8 moves of the Fist of Death were enough to make Rinpoche suffer. Rinpoche's bones had already taken shape, and there were many movements that he couldn't perform. Then the Empress ordered 2 Imperial Guards to press down on his shoulders and form a straight line. At that time, his voice was like the sound of a pig being slaughtered, and it spread throughout the entire palace for a long time. For 3 days in a row, Rinpoche's legs were splayed outwards when he walked. It felt like his legs were like noodles. He had to practice martial arts every day, but this was still okay. At most, it would be a little tiring. He still had to get beaten up every 2 days, and this made Rinpoche's heart full of regrets. Today he finally couldn't help but bring up the idea that he had been pondering over for a few days. At night, a female official helped to disperse the extravasated blood on his body. Rinpoche's body was also smeared with a layer of Indian divine oil. This was what Rinpoche called it. After applying the oil, his whole body would reflect light. However, the effect was indeed excellent. Every time he was smeared with Indian divine oil to disperse the extravasated blood, his whole body would feel comfortable. The next day, not a single scar could be seen on his body. However, he didn't know that only a small number of aboriginals could afford this Indian divine oil. Even though it wasn't considered priceless, it was still extremely expensive. Even the children of the court officials could only use it occasionally. It was impossible for them to rub it all over their body every 2 days like Rinpoche. A bottle of this medicine cost 100 taels of silver. Using one bottle at a time would cost more than 10,000 taels of silver a year. Even for the Empress, this was considered a considerable amount. Caretaker Sher was a rank 9 official, and his monthly salary was only 6 taels of silver. The annual rent for a shop on Jianghu Street was only slightly more than 100 taels of silver. The medicine used for the medicinal bath was even more expensive. A single medicinal bath cost 1,000 taels of silver and could only last for 7 days. Just the 2 medicines that Rinpoche used cost 50,000 taels of silver a year. Dayo wasn't rich. The entire imperial palace only spent 40,000 taels of silver a year. Most of it was spent on the salaries of the imperial guards, female officials, and maids. Rinpoche's expenses alone were more than the annual expenses of the entire imperial palace. The Empress could only rely on the income from the gold and silver mines for a small surplus. Coupled with the expenses on Rinpoche, the imperial palace's income immediately became a deficit. The next day Rinpoche hurriedly went out and met up with Feng Ho, the director of the Department of Ordnance, and Tong Yen, the director of the Department of Construction. He received news in the morning that the pile of bricks used to burn the furnace had been produced. However, they had all turned into slag. Along the way, Rinpoche sat on the back of the fork-horned cow and pondered the reason behind the bumpy ride. Since cement could be produced from burning, then some of the ores in this world should be similar to those on Earth. Furthermore, the main ingredient for burning bricks was clay. Such a situation shouldn't have occurred. When he arrived at the Jingtian furnace, the supervisor, Tai Mu, hurriedly welcomed him. "Sir. Yesterday the furnace fire was extinguished. We wanted to follow your instructions to take out the bricks, only to find out. Let's wait and see." Rinpoche waved his hand and hurriedly rushed to the furnace. The bricks inside had not been taken out yet. Rinpoche went down the ladder and saw that only half of the bricks were left. The rest had turned into slag and fell to the bottom of the furnace. The remaining bricks looked cracked on the surface. Many of them were bulging. When he touched them with his hand, they immediately turned into fragments. Rinpoche frowned. What was going on? "Soren, how is it?" Tong Yin shouted from above. After drinking together at the brothel, everyone was very familiar with each other. Rinpoche frowned and climbed out of the furnace with dust all over his body. He said to Tai Mu, "Do it again. I want to see what the problem is." Then he said to Tong Yin, "I'm not sure. Let's see." While the craftsman of the Jingtian furnace was working, Rinpoche took out a piece of paper and compared it step by step to see which step was the problem. "There's no problem?" Rinpoche muttered. He personally saw the craftsman of the Jingtian furnace crushing, stirring, and kneading the brick step by step. There was no problem at all. Could it be that there's something wrong with this piece of paper? Rinpoche started to suspect if there was a problem with the information he found. There might be something that wasn't written on this piece of paper. "Sir Rin, what's this?" Tong Yen and Feng Ho leaned their heads over. Just now they saw him holding a piece of paper and mumbling to himself. "I remember some things," Rinpoche replied casually. In any case, the two of them couldn't understand it. "I've never seen this kind of writing before." Tong Yen glanced at it and shook his head. Rinpoche ignored him. It would be strange if he had seen it before. "Hey, what are you guys doing?" Rinpoche looked at the craftsman as he sent the kneaded bricks into the furnace. "Sir, you said to burn it." The craftsman looked at him blankly. Dry it in the shade first. How are we going to burn it if we send it in like this?" Rinpoche's eyes widened. It was clearly written on the paper that it had to be dried in the shade. Sir, you told us to burn it in this way the last time. Taimu was dumbfounded. How is that possible? The bricks haven't even dried yet, how can they be burned? Ren Baqin stared at him. Sir Ren, you didn't say to dry it in the shade the last time. This is how we burn it, Feng Ho said righteously. Ren Baqin looked at Feng Ho with disdain and said, how is that possible? He thought to himself, damn it, did you really not say it the last time? Thinking about it carefully, it seemed that the last time the cement and the bricks were all done in one day. How could there be time to dry it in the shade? Chapter 244. Ren Baqin faced his opponent with a solemn look. After being beaten up a few times, the Empress finally changed his opponent. Following his shameless request, she changed his opponent to a 10-year-old child. Not only that, it was a girl. She was dressed in white silk clothes and had delicate skin. She looked like a delicious Lolita. Upon seeing this Lolita, Ren Baqin's mind was filled with the death penalty of at least 3 years in prison. Your Majesty, I can't do it. Ren Baqin frowned for a long time before sighing and turning his head to look at the Empress. If you can win, I will give you a reward. The Empress's voice carried a hint of charm. Ren Baqin listened to the Empress's voice and didn't get carried away. The fact that the Empress dared to say such a thing clearly showed that he couldn't beat this Lolita. Why don't you change your opponent to an 8-year-old? The Empress, Qing Yuan, Hong Luan, the Imperial Guards, and even the Lolita were shocked. Each and every one of them widened their eyes. Can you be any more shameless? I'm just joking. Why don't you change your opponent to a boy? Ren Baqin laughed mischievously. If it was a boy, he should be able to do it. Defeat her first, the Empress said while eating shaved ice. Ren Baqin sighed, lowered his head, and jogged over. He opened his notebook and played Nightwish She's Mystical In. The atmosphere immediately exploded. The little loli stared curiously at the 2 big boxes that were producing the sound with a pair of cute eyes. Her fingers subconsciously followed the rhythm of Nightwish song. How do I address you? Ren Baqin finally put on a serious look, cupped his fists at the Lolita and said calmly. The Lolita glanced at him, cupped her fists and said, Tong Lan. Ren Baqin felt that this Lolita was definitely not from an ordinary family. Her silk clothes weren't something that an ordinary person could afford. When he heard her surname was Tong, he subconsciously felt that she might be related to Tong Jinya. How is she related to the Minister of Works, Sir Tong? Ren Baqin asked again. That's my grandfather, Tong Lan said softly. Oh, as expected. Ren Baqin nodded. Then he said, a few days ago, I went to a brothel with your grandfather. The little loli nodded without any reaction. Come on, one look and I can tell that you don't know what a brothel is. You have wasted your words, Ren Baqin thought to himself when he saw her acting like this. At this moment, the Empress's cold voice sounded beside his ear. You really can't forget it. Why don't I accompany you? This subject is using tactics. As the saying goes, attacking the heart is the best. The best strategy is to attack the stratagem. Ren Baqin saw that the little Lolita didn't have any reaction, but the Empress reacted first. He immediately turned around and spoke in a deadpan manner. Everyone had a look of contempt on their faces. Don't you have any shame? Ren Baqin helplessly turned his head and looked at the obviously absent-minded Lolita. He crouched down slightly and exerted force with his legs to scuttle forward. Unparalleled vanguard. Ren Baqin shouted. When the crowd saw him make his move, they finally perked up. Then when they saw his legs kick 6 times in a row, their faces twitched. This move was clearly a horse-stomping chain kick. The moves of the Fist of Death were simple and ferocious. It was considered a widely spread fist technique in the army. Even if the crowd had not practiced it before, they more or less had some understanding of it. When they saw him make his move, they immediately realized that what he shouted and what he used were 2 completely different moves. The opponent was a 10-year-old child, yet he was still so shameless. These few days, Ren Baqin had once again refreshed everyone's impression of how shameless he was. Bang! Ren Baqin's nostrils spurted out blood as he fell to the ground. There was a small footprint on his face. Tong Lan lowered her head and looked at Ren Baqin, who was lying on the ground with a look of disdain. Liar! Ren Baqin covered his face. He couldn't even defeat a 10-year-old girl. There was no way he could continue living like this. Everyone looked up at the sky. A moment later, Ren Baqin, who had another footprint on the left side of his face, stood opposite Tong Lan again. Do you know how much 3,000 taels of silver is? How long is it enough for the Tong residents to spend? Ren Baqin asked with a serious look on his face. Of course I know. My monthly allowance is only 3 taels of silver. The Tong residents' monthly expenditure is also less than 1,000 taels of silver. Tong Lan raised her small face and replied. I owe your grandfather 3,000 taels of silver. If you slap my face again I won't return the money, Ren Baqin threatened. The Empress, Hong Yuan and Qing Yuan, the Imperial Guards, Tong Lan widened her eyes. Before today she had never thought that someone could be so shameless. Chance. Ren Baqin saw that she was distracted and immediately shouted, 100 battles on the battlefield. Both of his fists stretched out and stirred, creating an indomitable momentum. Everyone watched helplessly as he shouted 100 battles on the battlefield, but in reality he was using unparalleled vanguard. Bah! Ren Baqin held his stomach and fell head first onto the stone slab. I didn't slap his face this time. It's only right and proper to repay a debt. Grandfather said that if someone owes you money and doesn't return it, you should beat him until he returns it. Tong Lan lowered her head and said seriously. Ren Baqin suffered a lot from this day. Finally, he sadly realized that he couldn't even defeat a 10-year-old child. Even if the other party was Tong Jinya's granddaughter and had practiced martial arts since young, she was still a 10-year-old child. Sitting in Yangxin Palace Hall, the Empress saw his downcast face and finally couldn't help but say something. Now that you know the difference in strength, you just have to work harder in the future. Your Majesty. Ren Baqin raised his head gratefully. How about changing it to an 8-year-old opponent? I can't thank you enough. The Empress felt like slapping Ren Baqin to death. Why didn't she realize that he was so shameless in the past? Your Majesty, the Aboriginals are indeed blessed by the heavens. Their individual strength is peerless and I still need to work harder. Ren Baqin immediately corrected himself. The Empress's expression became better. She took out a piece of paper from under the cushion on the couch and threw it to Ren Baqin. Take a look. Ren Baqin received the paper doubtfully and opened it to carefully read the words on it. After a while, Ren Baqin raised his head in bewilderment and asked, Poison Warrior? Jianghu had lived his entire life with such a title, and now it was pinned on him? Would Jianghu be so angry that he would jump out of his coffin? The Empress nodded slightly and said, Previously in Great Xia we poisoned about 8,000 people to death with sarin gas. Including the ones killed by the winged cavalry, Great Xia lost a total of 13,000 people. In addition, the 9 pavilions were also destroyed. After investigating for a long time, Great Xia determined that you were the culprit. After all, no one in Dayo is good at using poison, and you are the most suspicious. Great Xia might assassinate you. After all, according to their judgment, your existence is too dangerous to Great Xia, second only to the general-in-chief who supports the nation Hongwu. I feel that the people they sent are already on their way. Ren Baqin continued to be bewildered. However, they didn't accuse you unjustly. Even though you didn't do it personally, it's almost the same. Furthermore, at the Falling Moon Gorge, you were the one who poisoned 2,000 people to death. You should be considered a meritorious deed, the Empress added. Ren Baqin looked aggrieved and said, Is it better for me to not leave the palace these few days? You can hide for a while but you can't hide forever. You will have to leave the palace eventually. Therefore, practice your martial arts diligently and have more ability to protect yourself. The Empress frowned. The strength of the people that Great Xia sent to assassinate Ren Baqin next time would probably not be the same as the previous 4. This made the Empress somewhat worried. However, there were still many things that Ren Baqin needed to do. He couldn't possibly hole himself up in the palace forever, right? You're tuning in to the Han Li's Wuxia Adventures YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.